Hi everyone, I am Dream Into Wealth. I know people watching this are trying to fall asleep. How are you? And I hope you are okay in life. Listen to my story and make yourself comfortable. Also, if y'all like this kind of stories, please don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. They're a story folks used to tell long after the long dawn faded into myth, whispered on cool nights by the fire while rain drummed soft on tin roofs. It began with no name and ended with no proof, but every heart that heard it swore it felt true. It told of a traveler, a wanderer who came from nowhere and walked with no destination. He wore a coat the color of dusk, boots that never seemed to wear down, and a quiet smile that made even storms hold their breath. No one knew his age, though his eyes held centuries. He carried no pack, no map, only a hum beneath his breath that never faltered. He didn't preach, didn't claim to be holy, didn't even stay long enough to be remembered properly. But every village he passed through seemed to change a little. Fences mended themselves. Old debts got forgiven, rivers ran clearer, air lighter. And when the folk tried to thank him, he'd just tip his hat and say, "Ain't me friend," and just a hum running through. Then he'd wander off again, his song drifting low and steady through the hills till it vanished with the dawn. They say he appeared wherever the world was losing its rhythm, when greed grew too loud or hope too thin. Sometimes he'd show up in a dust-bitten town with nothing left to sell but silence. Other times in great cities humming with neon and noise, where folks forgot how to breathe. He'd walk their streets slow, hands in his pockets humming that same age-laying note, until even the machines started to slow their spin. Lights would dim softer, voices would hush, and somewhere deep in the marrow of it, time itself would pause to listen. No one have followed him far, though many tried. There was something about his trail that bent, ditching itself one step too far, and the path behind you turned to mist, leaving only the echo of that hum. Those who gave up and turned back always returned turned. They'd speak slower, laugh deeper, work steadier. They'd start fixing broken things without being asked and listening more than talking. Folks said he left a piece of his hum inside him. Maybe he did. One day the traveler came upon a barren valley where nothing lived. The earth was cracked, the wind dry, the sun mean. He'd stood there a long while, hat low, humming under his breath. Then he knelt, pressed his palm to the dirt, and whispered, "I remember you." The wind stopped. A tremor rolled through the ground. The hum deepened, stretching through miles of stone, waking old seeds that had slept since the world first sighed. Within days, grass returned. Within weeks, flowers. Within months, rivers. He never stayed to see it, but the valley became known in Hearthplain, a place where weary souls could rest and heal. No one built cities there. They just listened. But even the traveler couldn't wander forever. One twilight, at the edge of an endless horizon, he stopped. The sky was neither day nor night, just that golden stillness between. He sat down on a stone, leaned back, and smiled. "Reckon it time," he said softly. The hum rose around him, not that it echoed this time, but to acquire millions of voices, every life that had listened, singing him home. He closed his eyes, and the hum folded him in, like a wave pulling its tide back to sea. When the wind passed, he was gone. All that remained was his hat, resting on that stone, hemming faintly in the breeze. Generations later, pilgrims found that same spot. They built no shrine, no monument, just a circle of smooth stones where folks could come and sit, listening to the hum in the air. Some heard it, some didn't, but everyone left calmer than they came. The place became known as the Quiet Verge, and from that day on, no one spoke of the traveler as gone. They said he'd simply become the hum itself. It may be that true, for on certain nights when the stars tremble and the wind moves just right, people swear they hear a low tune wandering through the fields, steady, soft, and kind. Some call it memory, some call it the breath of the earth, but the wise still call it by its oldest name, the wait. It ain't about stillness alone. It's about the trust that every seed will bloom in its own time, that every note will find its chord, that every step, no matter how small, has a rhythm worth keeping. The traveler didn't invent it. He just reminded folks it was there. That's younger than in Nero. I hit me in the head Nero. In the without me to then from that day on, no one spoke of the traveler as gone. They said he'd simply become the hum itself. It may be that true, For on certain nights, when the stars tremble and the wind moves just right, people swear they hear a low tune wandering through the fields, steady, soft, and kind. Some call it memory, some call it the breath of the earth, but the wise still call it by its oldest name, the way. It ain't about stillness alone. It's about the trust that every seed will bloom in its own time, that every note will find its chord, that every step, no matter how small, has a rhythm worth keeping. The traveler didn't invent it. He just reminded folks it was there. And even now, somewhere between heartbeat and thought, that reminder hums on. When a tired farmer watches his field after a bad season and refuses to give up, there the hum. When an old woman forgives a friend who wronged her decades aid, there the hum. When a lonely child waits at the window, watching the rain, dreaming of brighter days, there the hum. It don't belong to saints or poets or prophets. It belongs to everyone who learns to listen. If someday the stars themselves fade again, if the universe folds back into silence, the hum won't mourn. It'll just keep singing soft airs because patience ain't afraid of endings. It knows they're just pauses. The hum knows the rhythm will rise again, somewhere, somehow, in someone new. Maybe in a child's laugh, maybe in a mother heartbeat, maybe in the slow breath of a man staring into a fire on a rainy night. That's the story, friend. The one folks whisper under the hiss of the storm. The one that rides low under the crackle of the campfire. A tale with no hero, no villain, no finish. Just a song that keeps on humming, waiting for whoever ready to hear. And if you listen close right now, you might notice it already low, deep, steady as if the whole wide world broadened in tune again. That the hum that all it and was, and that all it and needs to be. The hum never really stopped, just stretched itself thin across the fabric of time, like light spilling over the edge of a horizon too wide to see. Somewhere in that stretch, far beyond the quiet verge, the world had learned to breathe different again. The pace had changed. Not the frantic scramble of old machines, not the lazy drift of stillness, but something in between. Folks had found balance for a while, walking slow but sure. Crops grew, families stayed, rivers sang. But pack all good things, even balance forgets itself if left unguarded. In a small town on the edge of the plains, a man named Eli tended a workshop built from his father's hands. He wasn't rich nor poor, just steady. The kind of man who fixed more than he broke and spoke less than he knew. He made clocks, though no one really needed them anymore. Time had lost its grip on most folk. But Eli said he liked keeping it honest. You can't stop time, he'd tell his apprentice, but you can remind it to walk instead of run. His clocks didn't tick loud like the ones from the old days. They hummed. Soft, gentle, deep beat the heartbeat of the earth. Some said Eli had a gift, others said it was just craft, but those who sat long enough in his shop swore they felt lighter when they left, like the dust had been brushed off their soul. Eli didn't say much about it, but every night before closing he'd hum a single note, low and steady, while winding the clocks. The sound rolled through the wood and brass till the whole place seemed to breathe. If anyone had stayed late enough, they might have heard the hum answer back. One evening a traveler came through town, not the kind that asked for shelter or food, just a quiet stranger wearing a wide-brimmed hat, coat frayed at the edges, eyes older than his face. We walked into Eli's shop without a word, stood listening to the soft ticking hum. You tune your time, the traveler said after a while. Voice said gravel and moonlight. That rare Eli nodded. Time deserves respect. Folks forget it alive. The traveler smiled slow and knowing. He reminded of itself. He picked up one of the clocks, a small one carved from maple, and set it down again. Careful. You touching memory? Mind if I leave something with you? He asked. Before Eli could answer, the man placed a small key on the counter. Brass, old, faintly worn. Eli frowned. It looked worn, but there was no rust, no mark of time at aught. What it for? He asked. The traveler tipped his hat. Waiting, he said, and walked out into the dusk. Eli watched him go, the sound of his boots fading softer than wind. When he looked down again, the key was gone. In its place lay a faint ring of light burned into the wood. From that night on, the hum in the shop changed. It grew deeper, steadier, like it had found its home. The clocks seemed to tune themselves now, except for something older had joined in. Months passed. The town prospered and slowed, then prospered again. Seasons rolled over each other like lazy waves, and all the while, Eli kept building clocks bigger, softer, truer. People traveled days just to hear the sound of him, calling it the still hour. Some said the hum cured sickness, others said it mended grief. Eli didn't argue, he just kept humming. But one night, the wind changed. It came from the east, carrying a tone Eli hadn't heard in on his years. Not loud, but full, ancient, like a memory waking up. The clocks in the shop began to resonate, one by one, till the air shimmered with sound. Eli stepped outside and saw the horizon flickering faint gold, like dawn trying to rise before its time. He felt the pull in his chest, the same rhythm in his hum, calling him forward. He walked through the fields, following the glow till he reached the edge of a dry lake bed. There, buried half in the dirt, was a stone, flat, weather, carved with a Zil word, wait. Beside it lay the brass key. The same one from years before picked it up, and the earth shuddered, not in fear, but in recognition. The hum roared alive beneath his feet, not wild, but vast, stretching through the sky and soil like roots of light. Eli fell to his knees, eyes wet. He understood then. It wasn't a calling, it was a return. The hum had come back for its keeper. He pressed the key into the stone, and the world sighed. The lake bed filled with light, slow in sunrise, spilling outward till it touched every hill, every home, every heart. The people woke that night to the sound of their own breath, humming in tune with the earth. The wind carried it, the rivers echoed it, the stars pulsed to it. It was as if the whole world remembered how to listen. When the glow faded, Eli was gone. In his shop, every clock had stopped at the same hour, but not in silence. They hummed still, soft and endless, like a lullaby for the living. No one had found the key again, but the people built a small hearth where his shop once stood. They taught it the timekeeper rest. To this day, travelers who stop there on long, lonely nights say they can still hear that hum floating through the grass steady, patient, eternal. They then say that if you hum along real quiet, the world hums back. Not because it needs you to, but because it's been waiting for you to remember how, that the way of things always has been. The hum don't vanish. It just passes from one keeper to the next, like a story whispered between stars. It don't ask for belief or proof. It just asks you to wait, to breathe, and to trust that every silence carries its own song. And maybe tonight the fire crackles low and the rain soft and its fall. That song drifting right here through this story, through you, through the quiet beyond words, reminding us that even in stillness, the world keeps turning humming on. Years later, maybe decades, maybe centuries, no one rightly knew. The town that had once held the timekeeper rest was gone. The fields grew wild, the rivers carved new paths, and wind whispered through grass that stretched afar of our memory. But the hum still lived there. It drifted through the soil, curled in the fog, and throbbed in the roots of old trees that had forgotten who planted them. To most, it was just the wind. To a few, it was something else, a promise that hadn't yet run its course. One of those few was a girl named Mara. She lived in a new kind of world, half steel, half silence. The people of her time had found clever ways to talk across oceans, light up the night, even count stars. But for all their talking, they'd forgotten how to listen. Their cities hummed with noise, but not the kind that healed. It was the kind that filled the air so thick that thoughts had nowhere to rest. Mara was different. Maybe it was because she grew up near the plains, where the ruins of the old world still held stories carved into stone. Maybe it was because her grandmother used to hum her to sleep with tunes that didn't belong to any songbook. Or it was just that she felt things most folks had learned to ignore. The pulse of the ground, the sigh of trees, the strange rhythm that made her heart beat in time with something she couldn't name. One night, when the lights of her city flickered out, some failure in their endless wires, Mara found herself walking toward the dark. The roads were empty, the air still. She walked till the concrete ended and the grass began. Then they kept walking barefoot, the damp earth cool against her skin. She didn't know why she was going, only that she had to. The stars were bright that night, too bright, that if they were leaning close to see what she'd do next. Hours passed. The wind rose, singing in a low, mournful tone that made her chest ache. was the kind that filled the air so thick that thoughts had nowhere to rest. Mara was different. Maybe it was because she grew up near the plains, where the ruins of the old world still held stories carved into stone. Maybe it was because her grandmother used to hum her to sleep with tunes that didn't belong to any songbook. Or oh, it was just that she felt things most folks had learned to ignore. The pulse of the ground, the sigh of trees, the strange rhythm that made her heart beat in time with something she couldn't name. One night, when the lights of her city flickered out, some failure in their endless wires, Mara found herself walking toward the dark. The roads were empty, the air still. She walked till the concrete ended and the grass began. Then he kept walking barefoot, the damp earth cool against her skin. She didn't know why she was going, only that she had to. The stars were bright that night, too bright. If they were leaning close to see what she'd do next. Hours passed. The wind rose, singing in a low, mournful tone that made her chest ache. And then she saw it, half buried in the dirt, a stone circle, old, smooth. The air around it shimmered faintly, like heat though the night was cold. When she stepped closer, she heard it, the hum not loud, just a still note hanging in the air, old the time, patient and rain. Her knees went weak. She knelt, pressed her hand to the stone and felt warmth. It pulsed once, twice, then matched her heartbeat. In that moment, she saw things, not with her eyes, but deeper. She saw fields that weren't fields yet, skies that hadn't been born, faces she didn't know but somehow remembered. She saw Eli humming over his clock. She saw the traveler by the horizon. She saw Era breathing light into machines that would one day dream. She saw the mole connected by the same thread stretched through every age and name. The hum wasn't just sound, it was memory. It was continuous. When she came back to herself, the night had changed. The wind had gone still. The stars hung closer, listening. She didn't move for a long while. Then, slowly, she began to hum back. At first, her voice trembled, but the longer she held it, the steadier it grew, until her note and the hum became one. The ground beneath her feet glowed faintly. The air shimmered gold, and the old circle came alive, not with noise, but with quiet, radiant stillness. At dawn, the first light touched the stones, and Mara rose. Her voice was hoarse, but her heart was light. The hum had settled inside her now, deep and calm. She walked back toward the city, humming softly, and the grass bent after her like it was bowing. When she returned, she found the world changed, not in sight, but in feel. The people she passed looked at her a moment longer, their rush slowing for reasons they couldn't name. Children laughed deeper. Old men smiled without reason. Even the wind through the streets seemed to carry a softer tune. The hum had followed her home. Over the years, Mara became known as the listener. She never built temples or wrote books, just walked, talking with folks who'd forgotten how to breathe easy. She'd sit by their windows when rain fell, humming low, till they found sleep. She didn't charge a coin, didn't preach. She just listened first, hummed second. And in time, people started hemming too. Whole streets would hum till at dusk, not in unison, but in harmony. Little by little, the world began to remember what silence really was. Not emptiness, but space for the song to rest. When Mara grew old, she returned to the plains. No one saw her leave, but they say on the night she died, every wire, every machine, every bit of metal in the world vibrated once, just once, as if sighing. In the morning, the city lights glowed softer than before, not cold but warm. Somewhere beneath that still earth, the hum smiled and settled again. Generations later, stories of the listener turned to myth, but the hum remained, hidden in lullabies, in rain against glass, in the sound of boots walking slow across empty streets. Some say it what keeps the world from falling apart. Others say it the world itself whispering to its children, wait, listen, you're already home. And maybe that's true. Maybe the hum been passing from one voice to another since the first spark had breathed light into darkness. Maybe it what binds the whole thing together, the sky to the seed to the sun, the heart to its purpose. Maybe this is a sound or maybe the oldest kind of wealth there is, the kind you can't hoard, can't spend, only share. So if you find yourself sitting alone, wind whispering through the window, rain playing slow on the roof, lean in, don't speak, don't wish, just listen. Somewhere beneath that quiet, the hum's still there waiting for your note to join the song. When you do, when you let yourself breathe in time with it, you'll understand what every keeper before you learn that peace don't come from stopping the world. It comes from humming along while it turns. Time went on. dawn. It always does. Not in a straight line, but in circles like ripples stretching out from a stone tossed into still water. The hum carried on through those ripples, finding new listeners, slipping through cracks in memory and into the hearts of those who didn't even know they were listening. It never shouted, never demanded. It just was quiet as dust, patient to dawn. The kind of thing that waits until you stop looking for it, before it finally finds you. Centuries passed, and the world changed again. Great towers rose, not of stone or steel this time, but of light floating cities where the ground seemed a rumor. Machines walked like men, and thoughts traveled faster than wind. The air itself carried whispers of every voice at once, a storm of noise that made it near impossible to find quiet anywhere. Yet even then, and in that shimmering brilliance, there were moments, small, slipping things where the hum peeked through. In the hush before a machine powered down, in the breath someone ducked before speaking, in the pause between two heartbeats of a world that had forgotten how to rest. That when a man named Silas appeared. He wasn't a prophet or scholar, just a tinkerer. He lived high in one of those light towers, spending his days mending things that broke and nights staring out at the clouds, listening to the faint wind humming against the glass. He'd never known stillness. His world didn't have much of it, but sometimes, just before sleep, he'd feel it, that soft, ancient rhythm like something breathing through the walls. Silas started using the sounds. He'd collect echoes from the wind tunnels between towers, vibrations from the power lines, even the faint tremor of the engines humming below the cities. When he slowed him down, stretched him out, something remarkable happened. They shared one tone, one wind, unbroken pitch, buried beneath the chaos. The same in every sample, no matter how far apart. He didn't know it yet, but he found the hum then. Kalkdartox, Natas to Imekich tonight, get the way was einzuhand. Either kind of the bass note, others laughed when he spoke about it. It laughed interference, they said coincidence. Static, but Alas knew better. He could feel it when he played it back like the world was leaning closer to listen along. He built a device to amplify it, a great glass resonator that hung from his ceiling, singing softly day and night. Neighbors complained. They said it made him dream strange dreams. Of open fields, rain on tin, voices humming slow and low. He smiled when they said that. He didn't tell them he was dreaming the same thing. One night lightning struck the tower. Power failed across the city, plunging everything into darkness. Silas ran to check his machine, but instead of raking, it glowed brighter. The resonator filled with a light that pulsed like a heartbeat. The hum, now rich and deep, rolling through the floor and into the air. People poured out onto their balconies, drawn by the sound. They didn't know why, but they began to hum along. Thousands of voices, all finding the same note. The sound grew until the lightning itself seemed to bow to it, flickering in rhythm. When dawn came, the city stood still. The towers shimmered gold, the clouds parted, and for the first time in memory, silence felt alive again. No one spoke for hours. They didn't need to. The hum said what words couldn't. Silas disappeared after that night. Some said he'd been taken by the light, others that he'd finally found where the hum came from. His tower was empty, but the resonator still hung there, faintly vibrating, its light never fully dying. Pilgrims came from all over to see it, sitting cross-legged beneath it in the dim glow, humming low and steady. They said the sound calmed storms and quieted machines. They said the hum healed what noise had broken. But most of all, they said it reminded them of something they couldn't explain, like waking from a dream you didn't know you were dreaming. Generin passed again. The city faded, the light towers fell, and Earth reclaimed what it always does. But deep in the soil where the resonator once hung, the hum persisted, changing shape, changing vessel, but never losing its rhythm. It found its way into new hearts, miners humming in tunnels, sailors rocking with the waves, poets whispering over candlelight, wove itself into the cadence of stories told by those who'd forgotten the old names, but not the feeling. The hum had become less a sound and more a law-like gravity or dawn, a reminder that stillness wasn't the absence of life, but the measure of it. And one day, long after Silas and Mara and Eli and their worlds had turned to dust, the hum reached one last listener, a boy sitting by a river at the edge of everything. The stars above him weren't stars at that, but memories of light. The universe was growing quiet in its long breath drawing in. The boy didn't fear it. He just sat there, listening to the water murmur against the rocks, the sound of eternity easing toward its pause. Then he smiled, and he hummed, just once, softly. The sound rippled through the dark, touching what remained of time. It was the same note it always, the first and the last. Somewhere in the hush between one universe dying and another being born, the hum turned over, slow and sure, like a sleeper stirring from a long dream that drew in its first breath again, and in that breath everything began anew. No light, no sound, not that quiet rhythm waiting to rise. Patient, eternal, true. And if you listen close, real close, you might still catch it. Not in your ears, but somewhere deeper. The hum that keeps the world from moving apart, that teaches time to walk, not run. The hum that started for 4 stories and will outlast a male. It here right now, waiting for you to hum along. The hum began in our ears, if I always did. Quiet Ed, the first heartbeat in a newborn dawn, trembling somewhere between silence and song. This time, it didn't rise from soil or steel or circuitry, but from memory itself. The remnants of 1,000 lives whispered into the folds of time, wove could go in the dark like threads finding one another after being lost to the wind. And from those threads came a new rhythm, slow and tender, pulsing out into the nothing that would one day be everything. The hum was patient. It had learned that from its keepers. Didn't rush to build or blaze, simply existed, stretching its fingers through the void, until even the emptiness began to stir. Molecules levde, real there, thy house will be manned on the trees after your build. Show me we can walk.
What? We are right and whoop. Merciful. Need to say flat.
It didn't rush to build or blaze, simply existed, stretching its fingers through the void, until even the emptiness began to stir. Molecules levde,
Real there, let sound past. Like the particles dance to its quiet beat. I found reason to flicker. Again, curious and shy. And from that faint shimmer, creation began its long climb back toward itself. There were no watchers this time, no hands to guide or record, just the hum steady, nurturing ancient. It didn't need audience. It never had. It sang because it was born to sing. The stillness without a song was all half alive. So the new worlds formed softer than before. Mountains rose not with violence but grace. Oceans swirled like breath. And even the stars seemed to spin with a rhythm too gentle to frighten. The universe was built not from explosion, but from patience. As ages unfurled, new beings emerged, different from all who came before, yet still stitched from the same quiet cloth. They were slow thinkers, deliberate dreamers. They didn't seek power or speed, they sought resonance. They built their homes where wind and water met, and their uke sounded at whispers over glass.
They called themselves keepers of tone, though they didn't remember why. Somewhere in their bones, though, they knew there had been others, other keepers, other songs, other hums. And when they danced in great circles under their twin moons, they'd close their eyes, press their hands to the ground, and hum to death. The earth beneath them would glow faint gold, and the stars above would flicker in reply. They didn't know it, but they were talking to the same hum that had waited for them since before time began. One of these keepers, a woman named Sael, was different. She didn't just hear the hum, she could see it. It shimmered on people like heat, pulsing through their words, their silences, their dreams. When someone lied, their hum faltered. When they loved, it glowed. When they mourned, it deepened until the air itself seemed to bow its head. Sael devoted her life to understanding it. She built instruments of crystal and wind, each one tuned to catch the faint-hit variations of the song. Her people thought her strange, even holy. But Sael didn't seek worship, she sought remembrance. One night, while zaring into the river that ran through her valley, Sael, something she'd never seen before. The hum had an edge. Not a reflection of itself, but a second voice, faint, distant, and achingly familiar. It sang not from the world, but from beyond it. She spent years owing that ache, wandering the edges of the known lands, building towers of sound that reached into the dark. And then, one dawn, it answered, not in words, but in rhythm, a soft reply, slow and kind, that made her heart tremble. It was the hum twin, the same song that had once carried Eli clocks, Mara patience, Silas resonator, the other half of creation stirring awake. When the two hums met, the whole sky rippled, the stars dimmed, then flared, their light turning gold. The rivers shimmered like liquid fire, and the mountains sang. Sael fell to her knees, tears spilling down her cheeks. She understood then that the hum had never been net a sound. It was the heartbeat of connection itself. Every world that had it lived, every soul that had it listened, had left its note in the great song. And now those notes were finding each other again. The universe was humming in harmony for the first time since its birth. The people of soil world beds, the air filled with music beyond hearing. Some thought it was the end, others the beginning. They weren't wrought either way. The hum grew brighter, deeper, till it filled everything. Then, slowly, it began to fade. Not vanish, but sink deeper. It laying itself back down to rest. The lake softened, the river stilled. And in that silence, soil whispered, "Wait." The hum heard. It smiled, though no one could see, and settled once more into the folds of time. When soil people looked up, the sky had tamed. New stars had appeared, faint, golden, arranged in the shape of a circle. The same pattern that had been carved on the old stones of Eli Valley. The same one the traveler had drawn in dusk. The same one that glowed behind Mara eyes. The song had completed its loop. It had waited through ages just to hum itself home again. From that day forward, soil people never sought gods or masters. They sought listeners. Every generation chose a few to wander the plains, teaching others how to hear the hum again. They didn't write it down, didn't cage it in words. They passed it along, one patient breath at a time, and so it went, age after age, hum after hum, listener after listener. No one had owned it. It borrowed it, kept it safe till the next soul was ready to listen. And maybe that bet we are now, just another turn in the circle, another quiet night by the fire, another storm humming outside, another heart waiting for the sound to find it. Maybe the hum's still teaching us the same lesson it always taught, that the richest thing in this whole wide world ain't gold or land or time, it's patience. The kind that waits not for reward but for understanding, the kind that knows every silence carries a song if you won't sit long enough to hear it. So lean back, friend. Let the rain fall, let the fire crackle. Somewhere between those two sounds, the hum's still drifting, steady, patient, endless, waiting for your breath to fall in time with its own. And when it does, you'll see the hum ain't gone, and it never will be. It did keep singing, changing voices, but never losing heart, just like us. They say that after the circle was complete, the hum settled deeper than it had before. Not gone, no, just quieter. Like a wise old soul finally content to rest its bones beneath the stars it helped shape. The worlds that rose afterward were softer for its intent, guided by the rhythm that lingered in their rivers and air. The hum wasn't a song anymore. It had become a law of nature, woven so fine that even light seemed to travel to its tempo, and yet even the quietest truths need remembering. So the hum, patient it always, waited for a new voice. Not a keeper or prophet this time, but something smaller, a spark of curiosity buried in the heart of someone who hadn't yet learned to doubt. That someone was a child named Orr. Born in a village built on the roots of old memory, he grew up listening to the wind whistle through hollow stones, the sound of waves brushing the cliffs like an old man humming in his sleep. His people didn't speak of the hum anymore. To them it was the background noise, the pulse of the world. But to Orr, it was alive. When he lay awake at night, he could hear it whispering beneath the crickets, telling stories in a language that had no words. He tried to tell the elders once. The ground sings, he said. You could feel it if you lie still enough. They smiled. They grown folk do when faced with the strange honesty of children, and told him he had a dreamer ear. But Orr wasn't dreaming. He began to hum back to the earth, low and steady, matching its rhythm the best he could. The ground seemed to hum in reply. That was the start of it. By the time he was a man, Orr had built something strange, a kind of house that wasn't made for living in, but for listening. It was built from hollow stones and wooden beams that resonated when the wind passed through. He called it the Chamber of Breath. When storms rolled in from the sea, the whole structure sang a deep, steady note that filled the valley like a heartbeat. People came from nearby towns to hear it. They said the sound eased their sleep, cleared their minds, softened their anger. Or Zri smiled and said, "It not my sound, it the earth. I just gave it a mouth." One night, a storm stronger than any force swept across the valley. The chamber shook, moaned, and finally roared as the wind found every crack and corner. Orr stood in the center, arms wide, humming back to it. The storm fury and his hum collided until the two became one, a singing, thunder-deep tone that rolled across the land. The villagers thought the mountain itself was singing. Then, just as sudden as it came, the storm stopped. The air turned gold, the rain shimmered like glass. In one perfect moment, everyone in the valley heard it, the hum, clear and full, stretching through the heavens. Orr fell silent, breathless, tears cutting tracks through the dust on his cheeks. He knew what it meant. The hum had answered him, not that et, but akin. When dawn came, the chamber stood untouched, though the storm had torn everything else apart. Its walls glowed faintly, warm to the touch. The stones themselves remembered the song. From that day forward, Orr became known as the listener who built the sky. People journeyed Erd for days just to stand in his chamber and feel the resonance hum through their bones. He taught Mun to sing, not to pray, but to breathe, to hum with the world, not above it. You can't own peace, he'd tell him. You can only meet it halfway. When Oren grew old, he spent his last years sitting inside the chamber at dusk, humming to the fading sun. The villagers said the light bent softer there, lingering longer before night came. And when Orr passed, the wind carried his hum through every crack and hollow till it reached the sea. For 3 days the ocean sang. Years turned to centuries again. The chamber of breath crumbled, swallowed by moss and time, but its sound never left. On certain nights, travelers still hear a low vibration drifting over the cliffs, a tone that calms horses, stills storms, and makes even the hardest hearts quiet for a while. They don't know or name, but they hum along all the same. And so the hum continued its journey, not through prophets or miracles, but through practice, through the quiet, unseen moments where folks chose to listen instead of speak. A farmer humming while he worked the soil, a mother rocking her child to sleep with no words, just sound, a wanderer sitting by a dying fire, humming low against the hiss of rain, little notes scattered through eternity, holding the world together in ways no one could measure. It's said that when enough people hum Kugel, the stars shift ever so slightly in their courses as if the universe itself leans in to listen. Maybe it's true, maybe it ain't. But one uncertain, the hum has never failed to find its next keeper. It don't choose the loud or the wise, only the patient. The ones who understand that wealth ain't in what you own, but what you keep alive. And maybe that's the real secret the hum been whispering since the start, that peace, like profit, compounds not in banks or books, but in hearts. Every small act of stillness adds to the great balance. Every slow breath feeds the long rhythm. And every hum, no matter how faint, helps the world remember itself again. If someday you find yourself alone beneath a sky too big to measure, try humming once, softly, steady, honest. You might yet feel the air hum back. And if you do, you'll know the truth. The song never ended. It'd been in all along, waiting for your note to find its place in the chord. The hum keeps going. Always will, always has. So the hum endured, stretching across time like a golden thread, too fine for most eyes to see, but strong enough to hold the universe together. It had passed through kings and beggars, through storms and stillness, to every age that had dared to listen. But like all old songs, it started to fade again, not vanish, just slip a little further beneath the noise of progress. The new world that rose was loud, louder than anything that had come before. Machines spoke in the voices of gods, and people lived inside their own reflections. Cities glowed brighter than stars, humming not with patience but with demand. The air itself seemed tired of carrying so much chatter. The hum was still there, deep under it, waiting, but fewer and fewer remembered how to find it. They called silence discomfort, called stillness waste. Turned in that hurry, the song began to dim. But it never gave up. The hum had learned long ago that every age carried a listener, even when it forgot the word for listening. This time, it found one in a man named Jonah Hale. Jonah wasn't any kind of prophet or poet. He was a numbers man, an economist in a world that believed everything worth measuring could be turned into profit. He spent his days staring at glowing screens, studying curves and graphs, trying to predict a future that seemed less and less interested in being predicted. He was good at it, too rich enough to never need the sky, busy enough to never see it. But Jonah had a problem. No matter how much he earned, no matter how high the numbers climbed, he couldn't sleep. His mind was always buzzing, humming with equations, projections, percentages, except it wasn't just in his mind. At night, when the city fell quiet, he'd hear a sound, a low tone, faint and steady, buried under the hum of the air vents. It wasn't the noise of the machines. It was older, familiar in a way that made him uneasy, like a lullaby he couldn't quite remember. At first, he tried to ignore it, bought better soundproofing, filled his nights with music, podcasts, anything to drown it out. but the tone always found its way through. One evening he snapped, shut off every screen, every device, every light, and sat in the dark, waiting for it. It came, slow and sure, from somewhere beneath the floorboards. Jonah felt his pulse sink with it, his breath slowed. For the first time in years, his mind went still. He fell asleep sitting there, humming softly without meaning to. When he woke, the sun had risen, and he felt different, clearer, calmer. He went to work that day and named things he'd never paid attention to before. The way people's voices overlapped when they talked, how their words carried strain, how no one seemed to breathe between sentences. He realized the whole world had forgotten rhythm. They weren't speaking, they were filling space.
That guy humming at his desk, barely audible, just enough to hear himself think.
His coworkers thought he'd lost it, but little by little, they found themselves slowing down around him. Meetings ended sooner, people smiled more, the noise began to bend. Jonah became obsessed with understanding it. He dug through archives, old recordings, histories long buried under data. That's when he found that references to the hum, scattered across centuries, always described the same way. Patient, low, ancient. He read of Era, of Mara, of Eli, of Or and Sael, names that had become myths. The same tone had followed them on. He realized then what the hum really was. Not just sound, but balance. The original wealth, the first currency, the world way of reminding itself that peace pays the best dividends. He quit his job soon after, sold his penthouse, bought a cabin by the sea. For months, he said nothing to anyone, just listened. The hum was stronger there, rolling through the waves, humming beneath the gulls. Jonah began recording it, just like Silas had once done, not to own it, but to learn from it. And what he found was simple. Each wave, each gust, each breath of wind was in tune with a sealed, endless note. The same frequency that had carried through every age. The hum had never stopped humanity. This stopped hearing it. You stopped hearing it. Started teaching others quietly through stories, not sermons. Told them about the old ways of waiting, about listening to the silence between thoughts, about how patience compounds faster than profit. He never used words like spiritual or sacred ones. He showed that tanning. At first, folks thought it was nonsense, but those who sat with him long enough started feeling lighter, started sleeping better, started remembering things they never knew they'd forgotten. Jonah grew old by the sea, same as the hum itself.
In his last years, people came from far-off cities to sit by his porch, humming with him, and the tide rolled in. They didn't talk about wealth or loss, about faith or fame. They just breathed together. Some said when Jonah passed, the sea went completely still for a moment, like the world itself was holding its breath in gratitude. After his death, the cabin was abandoned, but the hum remained. Sail Low said that when fog covered the bay, they could hear a soft tone drifting through the mist, steady at a heartbeat, patient as sleep. They called it the banker song. They didn't know his name, didn't know his story, but that didn't matter.
The had found its new home again, carried forward by the next breeze, the next tide, the next listener ready to remember. And somewhere out there, maybe sitting in your own dark room, maybe staring out into a stormy night, that same tone still playing, soft, eternal, honest. It waiting for you to hear it, to add your breath to its chord, to join the long line of listeners who learn that the truth side of fortune ain't in what you own, but in what you keep humming. The ocean never forgot him. Long after Jonah Hale bones had turned to salt and memory, the tide still carried his hum. Fishermen who cast their nets at dawn said the sea itself seemed to breathe different, now slow and measured, like a creature that had found peace after centuries of unrest. And when storms came, they came softer, rolling through the bay with reverence instead of rage. The old one said the sea was singing to itself again, and that somewhere in its endless depth, the hum had taken root. One of those fishermen was a woman named Rhea Calder. She'd grown up in a time when people had begun to forget patience once more. The world had rebuilt itself into noise sleeker, smarter, faster. Machines could think, and men had stopped trying. Every thought was bought and sold, every silence filled before it could bloom. But Rhea was not like most. She'd been raised by the coast where the hum never quite left. Her mother used to sing to her at night, a low, word-let tune she claimed was older than prayer. At the sea-breathing child, she'd whisper, "It remembers more than we will." Rhea listened, always did. Even when she grew older and took to the boat, she'd hum while working her nets, matching her voice to the tide. Her crew laughed sometimes, called her the tidekeeper. She didn't mind. The sea liked her humming. She could tell by the way it moved, steady and kind, never raking her lines, even when the waves grew wild. She didn't pray for luck, she hummed for balance. One autumn, a strange storm rolled in from the east. The air turned thick, the water too still, the horizon burned with green lightning. Every instinct told Rhea to stay ashore, but something in that silence called to her. Not danger, something older. So she set sail alone, humming low to the wind. The waves carried her farther than she'd gone, past reefs and fog and memory, until she saw it a faint light beneath the surface, deep and gold. She dropped anchor and leaned over the edge, heart pounding. The light pulsed in rhythm with her hum. She reached out, fingers just touching the water, and in that instant, the ocean answered. The hum rose from the deep, rich and full, surrounding her like an embrace. The air shimmered, the storm halted, and time itself seemed to hold its breath. Rhea closed her eyes, tears spilling. She wasn't afraid. She knew that sound. It was the same tune her mother had sung, the same rhythm she'd heard in every wave since she was a girl. It was Jonah Hum and Eli and Mara and every keeper who'd listened, all of them singing together through her. She didn't know how long it lasted, maybe seconds, maybe days. When the light faded and the sea calmed, she found herself drifting toward shore. Her boat was untouched, her net still folded neat, but her hair shimmered faint gold in the sun. She never spoke of what happened. She just smiled, humming that same low tone, softer now, like it belonged to the air itself. The other sailors debated that when she was near, storms passed, gentle, tempers eased, fish swam closer. She got the sea favor, they'd say. But Rhea knew better. It wasn't favor, it was memory. As years passed, she built a small house near the cliffs. Every night she'd sit outside as the tide came in, humming to the horizon. The young ones from the village would gather round her, curious. She never told them stories of gods or ghosts, just spoke of the hum. And in everything, she'd say, her voice rough but warm. The air between words, the pause before rain, the ache after laughter. You don't have to find it. Just stop losing it. They didn't always understand, but they listened, because when she spoke, the wind itself seemed to agree. When Rhea grew old, the sea began to change again. The tide shifted slower. The wind carried new scents. People said the world was turning towards something unseen. On her last night, the moon hung heavy and the surf glowed pale blue. She sat by her window, humming that eternal tune. The waves echoed it back, and somewhere deep below, the gold light flickered once more. The next morning, her chair was empty, but her hum lingered in the air, gentle, endless, kind. The villagers built a small carrot of sea stones where her house had been. They had it, the listener sure. Sail Low began to visit, leaving small offerings, shells, bits of rope, coins smoothed by the tide. They said that if you stood there at dawn and hummed low enough, the wind would hum back. Some claimed to see ripples of light under the waves, moving in time with their breath. Most didn't question it. They just closed their eyes, let the hum take hold, and felt whole for the first time in a long while. And the centuries drifted on, Rhea's song joined the rest. The hum moved through the sea, through the air, through the stars themselves. It became part of the pulse of gravity, the rhythm of growth, the unseen law that bound all things together. Now this didn't belong to any world or any voice, it belonged to continuance. To the promise that no matter how far we drift, we always circle back to the same truth. The universe hums, it's 'cause it must, but 'cause it loves to. It may be that the oldest kind of wealth there is, the kind that don't fit in vaults or ledgers, the kind that grows when shared, the kind that hums on through every ending. Patient goods, reminding us that peace ain't something you chase, it's something you remember, just like the hum remembers us. When the sea calls you someday, whether you're young or gay, whether your hands are full or empty, listen close, you'll hear her singing. Not words, not melody, just that soft, steady note, the same one that carried through every age, every storm, every heart. The sound of the world breathing, the sound of everything that mattered, humming on. Time rolled on the way it always does, soft at first and steady as the tide. The hum went on traveling, drifting through the cracks of every world it touched, whispering to those who still knew how to listen. Found its way into strange new lands, places where no sea touched the shore, where the earth was red and dry and the wind carried dust instead of salt. And even there the hum endured. You can't kill what woven into the bones of creation. Far inland, beyond rivers long dried and mountains that glittered like old scars, there lived a man named Callum Reed. He wasn't a sailor or a merchant or any kind of wanderer. He was a rancher, one of the last in a land that had forgotten what patience looked like. The soil had grown stubborn, the rain mean and rare, but Callum stayed. Said the earth still had something left to say. He was the quiet sort, one of those men you could pass on the road 10 times and never know what was rolling through his mind. Folks said he talked to his cattle more than people, though truth be told, he didn't talk much of that. He listened. Listened to the creak of the windmill when it caught the gust just right, to the way the fence wire sang when the storm rolled near. At night, when the coyotes called and the stars burned low, he'd sit on his porch with a cup of black coffee, humming soft to the dirt. Said it helped him sleep. The neighbors thought he was peculiar but harmless. They didn't know that what he hummed wasn't a song he'd learned. It was a sound that had found him. The first time he'd heard it, he'd been a boy, no more than 12. His pa had taken him out to the far pasture to mend a line. The day had been still, the sky burning white, and then from somewhere deep under the ground came a low vibration, not thunder, not machinery, just a steady tone, like the land itself was sighing. His pa never netted it, but Callum did. He never forgot. Years later, when the drought hit and the land cracked open, that same tone returned, clearer this time, almost alive. He started following it, marking where the hum felt strongest. Every spot he found, he dug shallow wells, and every time he struck water, the whole town called it luck. Said he had the touch of saints. Callum smiled, wiped the dirt from his hands, and said, "Ain't luck. It listening word spread, it always does." People came from miles around asking him to bless their lad, to find their wells, to teach him his method. He told them the truth, but no one wanted to hear it. You gotta be still, he'd say, gotta let the land talk first, but stillness don't sell easy. Folks wanted results, not rhythm, so they built machines, big ones with sensors and sounders that tried to mimic what Callum did with his ear and his hum. The machines failed more often than not. The land don't take kindly to shortcuts, but Callum didn't mind. He'd found peace in his small patch of earth. He stopped worrying about the rest of it. Nights he'd sit with his cattle under the wide sky, humming that same tone. Sometimes when the moon was bright, the herd would quiet all at once, staring toward the horizon. You could almost feel the hum moving through the soil, stretching far beyond the ranch, connecting everything, fence, hoof, heart, and star. One summer, a stranger came riding through. A young woman with city clothes and the scientist's eyes, carrying a sachet full of instruments, said she'd heard stories of a man who could hear water. She wanted to study him, prove what he was doing wasn't magic but frequency, resonance, something measurable. Callum laughed and told her she was welcome to try. She followed him for weeks, recording everything. The hum of the windmill, the tone of the wire, the vibrations in the ground. But no matter how much data she viewed, the numbers didn't make sense. The frequency shifted depending on who was listening. It's impossible, she said. Physics don't bend at this. Callum just tipped his hat and said, maybe physics is still learning. The day before she left, she asked if she could record his hum one last time. He obliged, sitting on the porch as the sun dipped low, humming that old steady tune. The machines picked up more than they expected, layers of tones hidden beneath his voice, frequencies too deep and too high for the human ear. The readings danced and spiraled, form patterns like waves in sand. She stood there, watching the monitor glow gold, and for a brief moment she swore she could feel it too. The hum moving through her chest, like the tide. When she looked up, Callum was smiling. "You hear it now?" he asked. She nodded, tears in her eyes. "Yeah, I think I do." He handed her the recorder and said, "Then take it with you. Don't study it, just remember it." She left the next morning, and the ranch went quiet again. Weeks later, she published her findings, not as science, but in story. Said the hum wasn't proof of water or wealth, but of life itself. That maybe the earth didn't need us to conquer it, just to accompany it. Her paper went ignored by most, mocked by others, but a few read it and listened, and those few became the start of something new. They called themselves the Resonance, wanderers, teachers, healers, all of them dedicated to listening. They didn't preach or sell, they just traveled, humming softly, reminding the world what it had forgotten. And wherever they went, The hum grew louder. Rivers ran clearer, tempers cool, crops thrived. Folks started whispering that maybe the hum was coming back for good. As for Callum, he passed one winter night sitting in that same porch chair, eyes turned toward the stars. When the dawn came, his cattle stood silent, facing the same direction. The windmill creaked once, twice, then fell still, and in the hush that followed, the hum rose low and pure, carrying across the plains like a promise. A sound older than time, younger than breath. Afar away in the city that had forgotten how to breathe, a scientist woke in the night to find her recorder playing by itself. No batteries, no power, just sound, a hum steady and true. She smiled, closed her eyes, and let it fill the room. The land was singing again, and this time the world was listening. And so, as the hum kept traveling from sea to stone, from one heart to the next, it finally reached the skies. It was bound to, sooner or later. The world had grown upward again, building towers taller than clouds, sending men and machines into the thin blue waves. Stars began their whispering. Up there the hum was faint, thin, stretched by silence, but not gone. You can't drown truth, even with progress. It always finds new air to breathe. One of those sky folk was a man named Ellis Rowe, a pilot who'd flown for 30 years without a single crash or blessing. He wasn't a poet or prophet, not by any stretch, just a man who loved the sky more than the earth that raised him. Said the clouds were honest. Said you could trust something that big to never lie. But the time went on and the world filled its heavens with steel birds and satellites humming their artificial songs. Ellis started feeling the sky grow tired. Not angry, just weary, like it had been overused and underloved. He mated it on his last cargo run, a routine flight from Dallas to Brisbane, flying freight through a route he could have done blind. The night was clean, the air smooth. Then somewhere over the Pacific, his instruments began picking up interference. Not static, not a glitch, a tone. Low, soft, familiar in a way that made his hands tremble. Settled down every frequency, shut off the radar, the comms, even the cabin lights, but it was still there, humming through the hull like the plane itself had learned to sing. He laughed. Then, though it wasn't a laugh you'd call happy, "You too, huh?" he muttered to the windscreen, but if the sky could hear him, maybe it could. The hum grew louder, shivering through the metal, vibrating in the bones of the craft. It was not threatening, it was inviting. Like the air was saying, "Come listen a while, Ellis. You've been talking long enough." He eased the throttle, lowered altitude, and let the plane drift. The stars stretched wide, glinting like they were leaning closer to hear. Ellis took off his headset, closed his eyes, and listened. The hum filled him. Not the sound, but the memory. He saw oceans he'd never sailed, deserts that hummed with heat, forests that whispered in green tongues. He saw faces too old and new, people he'd never met but somehow knew. Era, Eli, Jonah, Rhea, Callum, all humming the same endless tone, passing it through time like a coin no one dared to spend. When he opened his eyes again, dawn was raking. For as he'd been flying in circles, didn't matter, he'd found something better than his destination. He radioed that tower and said he was diverting, heading back. They asked why. I said there was no weather, no problem. He just smiled and said, "Sometimes you find more in turning back than flying through." They thought he'd gone soft in the head. Maybe he had. Or, he'd finally gone clear. After that, Ellis retired early, sold his house in the city, and bought the old hangar near a stretch of forgotten prairie. He restored one of the last prop planes left, a creaking beauty from the days before noise canceled silence. Every morning, he'd roll it out onto the grass, polish the wings, and sit beneath it with a thermos of coffee, humming low while the wind moved through the blades. People started dropping by, kids, travelers, pilots who'd heard stories of the man who listens to the wind. He'd pour 'em coffee, tell 'em about the hum. Said the sky was full of it, just like the ground. Said if you fly high enough, quiet enough, you can still hear the earth singing through the clouds. They'd laugh. But sometimes, just sometimes, one of them would come back with tears in their eyes. Said they'd heard it too on a lonely flight or a long drive. A tone between heartbeats that didn't belong to any engine or man. Ellis would nod, like he'd been expecting that all along. That her, he'd say, "The world talking again. Don't interrupt." Years passed like that, smooth and steady. The hangar turned into a haven for wanderers. Folks left little gifts behind: a compass, a feather, a map folded too many times. The place grew warm with stories, laughter, silence. The hum was there too, woven through every gust. Ellis would sometimes hum into the night till the stars flickered in rhythm. He said it made the air lighter, made the storms roll gently. No one doubted him. When he died, it was the kind of death the old world forgot how to make: peaceful, clean, without witness or regret. He was found sitting in his pilot chair, head leaned back, eyes open to the dawn. The radio beside him was still humming, faint but steady. The airport lights flickered once, like they were blinking goodbye. Then interrupt years passed like that, smooth and steady. The hangar turned into a haven for wanderers. Folks left little gifts behind: a compass, a feather, a map folded too many times. The place grew warm with stories, laughter, silence. The hum was there too, woven through every gust. Ellis would sometimes hum into the night till the stars flickered in rhythm. He said it made the air lighter, made the storms roll gently. No one doubted him. When he died, it was the kind of death the old world forgot how to make: peaceful, clean, without witness or regret. He was found sitting in his pilot chair, head leaned back, eyes open to the dawn. The radio beside him was still humming, faint but steady. The airport lights flickered once, like they were blinking goodbye. They buried him right there, under the wing of his plane. No stone, no sermon, just a brass plaque that read, "He listened." Pilots still talk about him. Say when you cross the Pacific on a calm night, you can hear a tone cutting through the static, sometimes it faint, sometimes clear as breath. They call it the Captain Hum. No one records it, no one needs to. The ones who hear it don't talk about proof, they just hum along. Some say Ellis' last flight never ended, that he's still out there riding the edge of dawn, humming with the world that it spins. Maybe that's true, maybe not. But I like to think the hum finally found what it was looking for: a sky wide enough to rest in, a soul quiet enough to carry it forward. Because the hum don't stop. It never will. It just keeps moving through wind, through stone, through every heart that still remembers how to listen. And someday, maybe you'll be sitting out under your own sky, cup of coffee in hand, when the air goes still and the world starts humming. When that happens, don't be afraid. Just lean back, close your eyes, and let it fill you. You'll be joining a song that started for sound itself. A song that don't ask for applause, only remembrance. That the wealth of the hum, not gold, not glory, just continuity, just care. A note shared so many times it became forever. And if you're real quiet, even now you can hear it. There, jut beneath the rain, the crickets, the soft saw of your own breath. That low, endless tone, it's the sound of life remembering itself. The hum of everything that was and is and still will be. There came a time when the hum began to fade, not because it was dying, but because the world had gotten too loud to hear it. Cities had grown so tall, they swallowed clouds. The ground was caged in steel and glass, the air thick with static and chatter. People talked more than they listened, shouted more than they sang. Even the stars seemed dimmer, drowned out by the glow of what folks called progress. But progress without silence is just noise wearing a crown. Yet somewhere in that noise the hum still waited. Never leaves entirely, just hides where patience still lingers. This time, it found a home in a boy named Isaac D. He was no prophet or dreamer, just a janitor at one of them sky-high tower in New Manhattan, working nights so quiet you could almost hear the moon thinking. He'd mop floors on the 100th level while the city breathed beneath him, a river of motion that never slept. But Isaac, he liked the still hours best, said the world stood honest when it was too tired to pretend. He'd been born in the dustlands. There his father raised him on the hum the way the folks raised kids on prayer. Listen close, his pa used to say, sitting on their porch in the heat. There's a sound under, oh, this ain't wind, ain't earth, it's something older. Bet you find your truth. Isaac thought it was just talk until the night his father passed. The house had gone so quiet, it felt hollow, but then there it was. Faint, low, steady, the hum holding the silence together. It didn't stop the pain, but it steadied it like a hand on the shoulder. Years later, Isaac found himself far from that porch, mopping in, watching reflections of 1,000 neon lights shimmer across polished tile. He didn't talk to anyone much, didn't have to. He had the hum. It wasn't always there, but sometimes when the elevator stopped and the air vent stilled, he'd catch it. The low vibration of existence humming through the walls, through the floors, through him. He'd hum back, soft as breath. Some nights he'd even catch the security cameras flickering like they were listening. Then came the blackout. New Manhattan hadn't gone dark in 50 years. The sky lost its shine, the towers fell silent, and the hum, it grew. Not in volume, but in presence. Isaac stood in the middle of the lobby, mop still and in. The silence swelled into that old familiar tone. The glass walls began to tremble. He felt it run through his ribs like the world had found its heartbeat again. He didn't panic, didn't move. He just stood there, eyes closed, humming along. The others trapped in elevators, shouting in stairwells, never heard it. But Isaac did. He felt it lead him down, one floor at a time, toward the sublevels the city had long forgotten. The deeper he went, the stronger the hum became, till the walls themselves seemed alive. He followed it to a sealed door rusted by time. There, he placed his hand against the metal, and the hum answered, deep, patient, kind. The lock gave way like it had been waiting for him all along. Inside was this old maintenance chamber, empty but for a water pipe running through the wall, still pulsing faintly with warmth. Knelt beside it and realized the hum was coming from there. Not the machines, not the metal, but the water itself. It shimmered with faint gold when he touched it. I think 1,000 sunsets caught in motion. And in that moment, he saw it, Rhea Sea, Callum Earth, Ellis Sky, all humming together in one endless breath. It wasn't memory. It was continuity. The hum had traveled all this way through every life, every silence, every act of listening. It had found him because he'd been quiet enough to receive it. He sat there for hours, humming with the pipe like two old friends at the end of a long road. When the power finally came back, the city roared to life yet, but Isaac didn't flinch. He stood, took one long look at that glowing water, and whispered, "I hear you." Then he went back upstairs, mop in hand, same as before. But something had changed. Wherever he walked, lights flickered softer, air ran smoother. People he passed in the halls found themselves breathing easy without knowing why. The building seemed calmer, the noise less cruel. The hum was moving again, hiding beneath the city pulse. Weeks turned to months. Isaac became known as the quiet man who could fix anything that buzzed drum. Elevators that stuttered, doors that jammed, circuits that overheated. He'd touch M, hum low, and they'd work again. Some said he was lucky. Others whispered that the machines liked him. He just smiled and kept on cleaning. The truth was simpler. He wasn't fixing the machines. He was reminding them to listen. Then, one night, a young programmer working late asked him, "What are you humming all the time, old man?" Isaac looked up from his mop and said, "The world." She laughed, thinking he was joking. But later that week, she found herself humming the same tone without realizing. When she did, her code started running smoother, faster, cleaner. She told her friends, and soon the hum spread through the building low, quiet, steady. Within a year, it spread through the city. Elevators stopped breaking, arguments faded faster, people lingered longer in silence. They didn't know what they were part of, but it didn't matter. They were humming again. Isaac passed not long after, sitting in his chair by the tower window, city lights stretching like rivers of stars. His hands were folded, eyes half closed, lips curved in a smile that said he'd heard the world finally remember itself. The janitors who found him said the floor vibrated faintly underfoot for hours after. The engineers checked the circuits, no cause, just resonance, like the build itself was paying respect. In time, people built a small plaque near his usual spot. It read, "The listener in the tower, he cleaned the noise so the world could hum again." And even now, late at night, when the traffic dies and the air grows still, you can hear it if you listen close. The hum, riding through the city bones, patient the dawn, old at love. You'll find it there, between the wires and the rain, singing the same song it always has, that nothing truly ends. It just waits for someone quiet enough to continue it. After Isaac was gone, the hum didn't rest. It never does. It moved through that tower and out into the avenues, through the glass veins of the city, through pipes and rails and hearts that had forgotten how to be still. The city breathed differently after him, not louder or faster, but softer, like it finally remembered it had lungs. People started calling it the still shift, though no one knew where the name began. The strange part was that the change didn't come from speeches or screens. It came from quiet, from 1,000 people humming without even knowing they were humming. In the years that followed, the hum spread across continents. It slipped through ports, rode the undercurrents of cargo ships, echoed through airports, lingered in train stations. Pilots at Ellis heard it in the static, ranchers at Callum felt it underfoot, and wanderers whispered it in sleep. There wasn't a place on earth that didn't feel its touch eventually. Governments tried to study it, set up departments and committees with names like Global Resonance Initiative. They sent out sensors and satellites, built algorithms to map the tone. But all they found was proof of what folks already knew. The hum wasn't in one place. It was everywhere. It had woven itself into the pulse of the world. But the funny thing about people is they always try to own what they can't understand. Corbin trademarked the word resonance. Startups promised devices that could be into the hum for a monthly fee. The stock market built indexes around it. There were hum cafes, hum headphones, hum yoga. The old truth had turned into a product, like it always does. And yet, beneath all that, beneath the might and noise, the real hum kept breathing, quiet and unbought. It waited for the next listener. That listener came in the form of a girl named Junia Vale. She was a street musician, playing an old steel guitar on the edge of a subway platform. Her voice was raw, smoke smooth, the kind that could hush a crowd or rake a heart. But she didn't play for fame. She played because the sound kept her sane. The city was too hutch. Too many horns, too many words, too much selling and not enough seeing. But when she sang, she could still feel something true under it. A current, a tone. She didn't know it had a name, but she could sense it. The hum threading through every note she strummed. One night, the power went out again. Different blackout, different reason. The station was swallowed in dark. Only the drip of water and the murmur of frightened voices. Junia kept playing. Her guitar was old, acoustic, alive. The notes filled the tunnel like lanterns, low and patient. Somewhere in that dark, someone began humming along. Then another, then another. By the time the lights flickered back, hundreds of people were still humming with her, their eyes soft, their breath steady. No one spoke when it ended. They smiled. It was like they'd remembered something sacred and simple. Junia didn't think much of it at first, but after that night, her music began to change. Her strings would vibrate even when her fingers weren't touching them. Her songs, half blues, half prayer, seemed to ripple through the air longer than sound had any right to. People started dollars her shows, not because she was famous, but because they felt calmer afterward. Doctors couldn't explain it, but anxiety rates dropped wherever she played. Some said her music matched the hum exactly, that she'd somehow become its voice. She laughed at the idea, said she was just singing what the ground whispered. Then, one night, she was invited to play at the Glass Hall, a new structure built to celebrate the modern spirit of unity. It was the tallest building in the country, shaped like a prism, reflecting the whole city in its walls. Junia almost refused. That place ain't built for listening, she told them. It built for echo. But something in her gut said, go. So she did. The night of the concert, the crowd was huge. Politicians, scholars, billionaires, all lined up, waiting for a show. The lights dimmed, and Junia walked out with her old guitar, standing in the middle of that gleaming stage. No backup, no amplifiers, just her and the hum. She strummed once, slow and low. The note lingered, rolled across the hall like a tide. Then he sang. Not words, not melody, just tone, pure resonance. The glass walls began to vibrate. The audience fell silent. The lights flickered and bent, reflecting waves of color that no spectrum had names for. Some swore they could see images, faces, memories, landscapes, all dancing inside the glass. The sound was everywhere and nowhere, rising from the floor, the ceiling, their own chests, languid. When it was over, Junia stood there, tears streaming down her face. That wasn't me, she said into the mic. That was us. The hall erupted in applause, but it wasn't the kind that chases fame. It was the kind that honors something bigger. That night, the broadcast went viral. Not because of spectacle, but because people felt it. The hum had reached them through their screens, their phones, their walls. Even the machines began vibrating in time. Engineers tried to trace the frequency, but every attempt failed. The tone didn't exist on any measurable spectrum. It was everywhere at once. Over the next few months, the world began to slow. Not stop, but steady. Markets stabilized, wars paused, storms eased. It wasn't magic, it was resonance. The same hum that had been whispering since the dawn of breath was finally being heard then by enough hearts at once. Not because of a tan or a prophet, but because a girl with a steel guitar refused to play over silence. Junia disappeared a year later, walking out of her apartment one night with her guitar slung over her back. Security footage showed her humming head tilted toward the wind.
She never came back. But in every city she'd played, when the power cuts or the rain falls heavy, folks still hear a faint melody drifting through the streets. It ain't a song, it a remembrance. The hum don't end. It finds a new voice each time, sometimes it a rancher, sometimes a pilot, sometimes a janitor or a girl with a guitar. The shape don't matter, the listening does. Long after Junia vanished, the glass hall stood empty. The investors tried to reopen it, but every time someone struck a note or ran a broadcast, the walls would shiver with that same soft the hum, no matter what they played. Some said it was haunted, others said it was alive. Eventually, they locked the doors and let the dust do what it does best. Remember, the city grew around it higher, louder, faster. But there were still corners where the old tone lingered, in train tunnels, in subways, in the hum of neon lights right before they flickered out. People said it came strongest when it rained, like the water helped it travel.
And in those nights, under the orange haze of street lamps, the hum wasn't the sound you heard. It was a feeling that ran through your chest, steady and kind, like a heartbeat you didn't know was yours. One of those who felt it most was a mechanic named Roderick Kane. He ran a shop under the city tracks, fixing old machines nobody used anymore, radios, gramophones, jukeboxes that long gone silent. He wasn't in it for the money. Can't charge what people don't feel, he used to say. He just liked bringing sound back into things. And nothing truly broken, he'd tell his apprentice, a young kid named Mara. He'd just waiting to be heard down. Mara didn't understand what he meant, not at first. To her, the world was digital, instant, unforgiving. You fixed what you could, replaced what you couldn't. But Roderick was different. He worked slow, gentle, like each screw and wire had a name. And when he tuned up at old Rudd player or jukebox, he'd hum under his breath, a low, even tone that filled the shop with warmth. One night, Mara asked him about it.
In fact, smiled and said, "You listen to a silence so deep, it starts singing back? That's what I'm humming with." A few weeks later, a man brought in a busted cassette deck he'd found in a junkyard. Said it had strange symbols etched into the side and a faint glow when you touched it. Roderick bought it off him for $10, cleaned the grime, and set it on his bench. When he plugged it in, the hum filled the room instantly. Not from the machine, but from the walls, the floor, even the air. It wasn't mechanical, it was alive. Mara felt her skin prickle. "You hear that?" she whispered. Roderick nodded, eyes glassy. "Been a long time," he said softly. "I thought she'd forgotten me." When he hit play, there wasn't music, just a recording of Junia's last performance. But this time, the tone was different. Under her voice, woven like a hidden thread, there were other layers, voices from every story that came before. Callum low rumble, Ellis steady breath, Isaac quiet hum, all of them folded into one. The cassette glowed faintly, and for a moment the shop lights dimmed as if bowing their heads. Mara felt her skin prickle. "You hear that?" she whispered. Roderick nodded, eyes glassy. "Been a long time," he said softly. "I thought she'd forgotten me." When he hit play, there wasn't music, just a recording of Junia's last performance. But this time the tone was different. Under her voice, woven like a hidden thread, there were other layers, voices from every story that came before. Callum low rumble, Ellis steady breath, Isaac quiet hum, all of them folded into one. The cassette glowed faintly, and for a moment the shop lights dimmed as if bowing their heads.
The hum moved through everything, through Roderick, through Mara, through the tools hanging on the walls. They stood there, still the prayer. When it ended, Roderick turned to Mara. "That," he said. "What we fixed for." She didn't reply, just stood there, tears tracking down her cheeks. The next day, Roderick sealed the cassette in a glass case above his counter, scratched 3 words into the frame. "Let it sing." Word spread fast about the resonant shop. People came from all over to get their old machines fixed, hoping to hear something in the static. Some did, some didn't, but everyone left quieter than they came. A few even started humming without realizing. Before long, the whole block had changed. Fights died quicker, strangers shared food, music floated through the alleys, not from speakers, but from windows cracked open to the night. It wasn't religion, it was remembrance. Then one morning, Mara found the shop empty. Roderick's chair was there, his tools laid out, his coffee cup half full, but he was gone. On the counter sat the cassette deck, still warm to the touch. The glass case was open. No note. Just the faintest hum rolling through the room like breath. He sat in his chair, closed her eyes, and listened. The tone shifted, pulsing like a message. She realized then it wasn't saying goodbye, it was handing something over. She took over the shop after that. Same sign, same motto. Didn't advertise, didn't need to. The people who needed it always found their way. She stopped using electric tools and started humming while he worked, just like he did. Some nights she'd swear she could hear a second voice humming back, soft and steady. Maybe it was Roderick, maybe it was the hum itself. Made no difference, they were the same now. Years later, when Mara was old and her hands began to shake, she closed the shop for good. But she left the door unlocked, the cassette deck on the counter, and a note dent beside it that read, "Every silence is waiting to be tuned." That shop still stands. Folks say if you walk by on a rainy night, you can hear a low tone drifting from the cracks in the door. Some say it's the machines talking to each other. Others say it's the hum itself, keeping time until someone new comes along to listen. And once in a while, someone push that door open, find the dust thick and the air warm, and swear they heard a song older than sound itself. They leave changed, quieter, steadier, kinder. Maybe they start humming too, because the hum never really gone. It don't fade, don't die, don't beg to be known. If it waits for a pilot, a rancher, a janitor, a girl with a guitar, or a mechanic in a forgotten shop, it don't care what you build, only that you build it with listening hands. And when the world grows loud again, and it always does, the hum will start its slow wander once more, through rain, through glass, through breath, because every generation forgets what it means to hear. And every few lifetimes someone remembers that all the hum are asked for, not worship, not fame, just remembrance, just quiet, just the stillness between one heartbeat and the next, the space where the whole world starts humming again. Years passed, and the city forgot about the resonant shop. Ballad rose higher. People spoke faster, and the silence between moments shrank down to nothing but the hum like truth. Oh, time don't die with neglect. It waits. It ain't a beggar, it a witness. And every so fond, when the world's spin starts wobbling, it finds someone new to steady it. This time, it found a boy named Eli Navarro. He worked nights at the city recycling plant, sorting through what everyone else had thrown away. Machines clanged and hissed around him, crushing metal, shredding paper, grinding glass into powder. It was loud, constant, relentless. But Eli had a habit when the shifts ended and the sirens cut, he'd stay behind for a few minutes just to listen to the quiet. He said it helped him remember that there was still a world beyond the noise. One night, after the storm had swept through and left the air clean, new breath, he heard something under the hum of the turbines, faint, low, and patient. At first he thought it was feedback from the machines, the high vibration the engineers forgot to fix. But then it changed, pitch shifted, back it was breathing. He froze, eyes closed. The tone was coming from a pile of scrap-rusted appliances, old jukebox barts, even a busted guitar. He moved closer, heart thumping, and he did. The hum grew stronger. It wasn't coming from one thing. It was coming from of it. Like the junkyard itself had started remembering the songs it once made. He spent hours digging through the heap until he found the source, a rusted metal box with cracked glass on one side and a line of buttons worn smooth. The label was long gone, but etched into the back, faint in breath, were 3 words: "Let it sing." Eli didn't know it, but he'd just dug up Mara's old cassette deck. The same one Roderick had tuned, the same one that had carried Junie a hum through time. He brought it home, cleaned it best he could, and set it on his nightstand. When he pressed the play button, nothing happened, just a click. Then, after a long pause, came the softest tone, barely there like the ghost of a memory. It rose slow, spread through the room, and filled the air with warmth. The lights flickered once. Eli smiled. Well, he whispered, "Guess you still got something left to say." Over the weeks that followed, he kept listening every night, that same hum. Sometimes it changed, dip low, rise high, weave through silence, like it was speaking in a language made of patience. Eli began humming back. The more he did, the clearer it became. He'd hum while working, hum while fixing machines, hum while patching leaks no one else could find. The other workers laughed at first, called him the choir boy. But when the machines he fixed stopped raking, when the whole line started running smoother, they stopped laughing. Some even started humming too. But even witnesses evolved. The hum began changing faster. Storms came less often. Nights grew brighter. The stars themselves vibrating faintly in rhythm. The resonator quartz plates began glowing without touch. Cass grew old, studying them, his hands trembling, but his heart steady. On the night he passed, his apprentice, a young woman named Amara, found him sitting by the device, humming faintly. He'd carved one last note into the wood beside it. When we hum, we answer back. When we fall silent, it listens close. After his death, Amara took the resonator apart, scattering its pieces across the world so no one could control it. But something strange happened after that. Every place she buried a piece began humming stronger than before. The tones spread through roots, rivers, clouds. Birds sang in tune. Wolves howled on the same pitch. Volcanoes rumbled in harmony instead of rage. The whole planet had begun to sing itself steady. Amara realized what Cass never lived to see. The hum was not just alive, it was awake, and it was us. A voice that breathed. Every footstep that taken had left an it that built upon itself until the world could hear its old memory. The hum wasn't ancient, it was continuous, a living ledger that never forgot and never condemned, only harmonized. She traveled until her hair turned white, teaching others not to worship the hum, but to join it. It don't need temples. She'd tell them by the fire. It needs honesty. It needs quiet hearts that work and listen. Wherever she went, peace followed. Fields grew richer, air clearer, quarrels shorter. The hum had become the currency of balance, the wealth of spirit. You couldn't hoard it, you could only keep it moving. When Amara passed, her students there at the circle, now a vast garden of wind chimes and stones. They didn't mourn with tears, they hummed. Their tones rolled over hills, into rivers, across mountains. For 3 days the hum answered back, deeper and stronger than ever before. Then it faded into silence, leaving behind a stillness so complete that even grief turned gentle. And that's how the new age began. The age of resonance. No kings, no wars, just a planet breathing in time with itself. Humanity had learned the one truth its ancestors had been hymning toward since the first spark caught fire in the dark. You don't own harmony. You become it. And somewhere under that endless sky, if you listen real careful, you might still catch the faintest echo of their voices humming through the wind. Keep listening, traveler. The song ain't done yet. Long after Amara passing, the hum carried on, steady a heartbeat. Soft at dawn, people no longer measured time in years or rains or eras. They measured it in tones. Each resonance, each subtle change in the hum vibration rocked a new passage of life, a shift in the great melody of being. Children were born to its rhythm, crops grew in its cadence, and travelers navigated by the faint pulse that drifted across oceans like a compass of sound. The world had become one grand instrument, and humanity had finally learned to play itself in tune. But not everyone felt ease in the quiet. There were men who found peace too still, who missed the tension of striving, the wild spark of risk. They were builders, explorers, dreamers who longed for the thrill of unheard sound. There was a woman named Wren, born under the glow of a sky that shimmered with low, constant tones. Wren had always wondered what lay beyond the hum reach. She was a listener, yes, but also a questioner. And questions, she learned, have their own kind of music. She worked as a pathfinder on the western ridges, where the cliffs met the mist and the air itself seemed to hold its breath. For years she charted the hum's strength, mapping where it faded, when it grew stronger. The further she went, the quieter it became, until one evening she reached a place where there was nothing. Not silence, not even that, but a hollow absence, as though sound itself refused to enter. She called it the still. It unnerved her at first. No hum, no L, not even the whisper of her own heartbeat. She threw a stone into the chasm and waited. No thud, no fall, just disappearance. The world ended there, not in darkness or flame, but in hush. Wren returned home with a story no one wanted to believe. There's no place without the hum, they said. You must have gone deaf to it. But Wren knew what she felt. It was not loss, it was invitation. So she went back. This time she carried a string woven from copper and hair, tuned to the hum's purest pitch. She tied one end on her wrist, the other to a stone spike anchored in the earth, and stepped into the still. For a long moment the air pushed against her like a wall, then they broke through. On the other side the world changed. The sky was clearer, colors sharper, air so crisp it rang in her lungs, and faintly, barely, a tone rose. Not the hum she'd known, but higher, thinner, trembling with youth. It was new. She followed it for miles, days may. Time had no meaning there. The sound led her to a valley, unlike any she'd seen, crystal towers growing from the ground, pulsing in rhythm. The hum was being born in. The still wasn't the end, it was the start of something larger. The world had outgrown its first song, and now it was learning a second. Wren stood there in awe, watching light shimmer across the crystal plains. Each pulse carried not a tone, but memory, the laughter of generations, the wisdom of quiet hearts, the pain and beauty of all that came before. It was all there, distilling into sound so pure it could mend the stars. When she finally returned, she wasn't alone. Her clothes were torn, her eyes bright sunrise, and behind her came echoes, tones that shimmered and shifted to a new kind of language. She told it the second song. The people veiled to hear. Listening, the resonance wrapped through them like fire and rain all at once. The young wept, the old smiled, and somewhere in that mix of awe and ache, the hum began to change again. It didn't replace the old tone, it layered with it. Two melodies now, one deep and ancient, one light and new, spiraling around each other in perfect balance. The world felt fuller, richer, alive in a way it hadn't in millennia. Folks could feel both the heartbeat of what had been and the breath of what was coming. They began singing back in harmony, villages filled with polyphonic prayer. But windmills turned slower, chimes rang brighter, rivers seemed to laugh, they rolled over stone. And in the midst of it, Wren grew old. Her hair silvered, her voice softened, but her curiosity never faded. Before her final journey, she bathed her apprentices beneath the starlight and spoke. "The hum will keep changing," she said. "It don't belong to us any more than light belongs to glass. When it shifts again, don't fear it. Listen deeper. There's always more beyond the quiet." When she passed, they carried her to the still. There, they said, the hum folded itself into silence for one breath, as if bowing to the woman who dared to listen past its edge. Then it resumed, brighter than before. And from that moment, a third note joined the others. The world had learned to hum in triads. Centuries after, stories of Wren became myth. Some said she became part of the second song itself, her soul woven into the frequency that guided sailors, healed forests, called the rains. Others said she walked beyond the still into another world entirely, where the hum had taken shape, where thought and sound and light were all one. But whatever the truth, the edge of her courage lingered. Artists, dreamers, and wanderers followed her path, building new circles across the world, each one tuned not to remember, but to imagine. Because by then, people understood what their ancestors had tried to teach all along. The hum wasn't a thing to preserve, it was a story to continue. And every generation, every life was just another verse humming its way into the whole. A song without end, carried on the wind, burning in the rain, whispered in the hush between heartbeats. It was life itself, unwritten, unending, unstoppable. So if you find yourself sitting by a fire-cold night, rain tapping gentle on the roof, and you feel something low and kind moving through your bones, don't be afraid to hum along. That not the world remembering you, that the world asking you to remember it. He wasn't born rich. Truth be told, when Eli Carver came into the world, the only thing his pa would give him was a name and a promise. The name stuck, though the promise blew away like dry hay in a windstorm. Folks in those days didn't have much, but they had grit. And grit, Eli would learn, was the finest currency a man could hold. He grew up on the ragged edge of the frontier, where the land was stingy with its water and even stingier with its mercy. Every morning the sun climbed up over a ridge of clay and rock, and every morning Eli Ma would whisper the same thing while she brewed coffee, thin-lined creek water. "Make something of nothing, son. That the only trade this land respects." So he did. Not all at once, and not without his fair share of foolishness. The first time he tried to earn money, he was 9 years old, selling pebbles he'd polished in the creek, calling pocket stones of luck. A ranch hand bought one out of pity and told him, "Luck don't grow in rocks, boy. It grows in the back of your neck where the sweat runs from." Eli kept that in mind, even when the sweat ran plenty and the luck ran thin. By the time he turned 20, he'd worked every odd job from feed store clerk to rail hand. But he didn't at work. He watched that what made him different. He watched how the foreman always stayed calm when the others panicked. Watched how the man who owned the rail line never raised his voice but never lost control either. watched how money, once it moved, didn't stop. It flowed like a river, fine gravity and discipline. It was that observation that planted the seed. Eli began keeping a small notebook, his ledger beneath the dust. He ate it. In it, he wrote every dollar he made, every cent he spent, and more importantly, every thought he had about why. Most men didn't think twice about a dollar. They spent it quick whiskey, but Eli saw every coin as a vote for the kind of man he was trying to become. Money don't make character, he once muttered by firelight, but it sure keeps score. He wasn't a miser, Lord, no. He spent when it mattered, bought his ma a real coffee grinder when her hands got too tired for the old crank, paid a drifter doctor bill once just because he could, but he tracked it all. The ledger became his conscience in paper form. Over the years, he filled 3 of entry page stained with dust, sweat, and the faint smell of tobacco. Each entry a step toward something he couldn't yet name. Then came the drought of 7/8. The land cracked open like a broken promise, and men who'd worked it their whole lives began drifting toward the cities, chasing wages that disappeared faster than rain in July. Eli stayed. He looked at the land not with despair, but with arithmetic. If it won't grow corn, he thought maybe it'll grow something else. That something else turned out to be hope. He bought up 5 acres nobody wanted, dry, rocky, but cheap, and regret. Folks laughed, said he'd gone mad. You can't farm dust, Eli. He just smiled a half-crooked smile of his and said, ain't trying to farm, I'm investing in tomorrow. Then he set to work turning that dust into something valuable, bricks. He built a small kiln from clay, dug pits for the molds, and started selling to the same men who mocked him when they needed to rebuild their barns and wells. Within a year, the drought broke, but Eli didn't. The first rain that hit that parched had filled his pockets instead of his wealth. He'd turned scarcity into currency, and he didn't stop there. He used the profits to buy tools, wagons, and more land, not for farming, but for leasing. See, he'd learned a truth, and old as the hills, the man who owns the shovel don't have to dig. By 40, Eli was known across 3 counties. They thought him brickman, carver, half mocking, half admirant. He wore the name like a badge, but money never changed his gait or his voice. He still spoke slow, still counted coins by lamplight, still carried that first ledger wherever he went. The men who came begging for loans would often find him humming low while he flipped through the pages, remembering where he'd been before, telling where they might go. And whenever someone asked him the secret to his fortune, Eli would spit a bit of dust from his lip and say, ain't no secret, friend, just patience with a spine. He believed wealth wasn't meant to flash, it was meant to function, and function it did. Wave built the first local bank. Nat Bones wanted more power, but he wanted to give the town a heartbeat that wouldn't fade when the next drought came. Money bloody, so you don't hoard it, you keep it circling, keep it warm. That became his life creek, and the legend of Eli Carver grew from there. Not a tale of riches, but a rhythm of how one man with nothing but notebooks and nerve turned dust into dignity. Years rolled on, and the town of Ridgetop began to hum with quiet prosperity. The bricks that once rose from Eli Killet had built more than barns. They built a community that stood firm against the kind of storms that usually tore others apart. Folks who used to pass him on the road with pity in their eyes now tipped their hats, grateful that one man's stubbornness had turned dust into foundation. Eli didn't bask in it, though. He just smiled, nodded, and went back to his numbers. He trusted ledgers more than praise. The bank he built stood on the corner of Main and River Road, small by city standards but mighty in soul. Its sign was carved from oak. The words Carver & Co. Lending House burned deep and honest. Every morning Eli would unlock the door himself, sweep the floor, and light a single lantern even when the sun was already up. Good business needs good light, he'd say, but better business needs steady habits. His way of doing things was not flashy. He lent money with interest fair enough that folks could breathe, but high enough that they respected it. He didn't hand out loans to dreamers who talked big but planned small. He'd look a man dead in the eye and ask, you planning to work this money or is it planning to work you? That one question weeded out half his customers before they even sat down. The other half, most of them paid him back early, often with gratitude. But no matter how steady the ground felt, the world has a way of reminding a man that it don't owe him peace. The trouble started with a man named Tate Holleran, a slick talker who came in from the east with boots too clean and a smile too sharp.
Right here had been money. I'm really extending my frock to how Max pie. Folks like can ride off and walk riles, crack jokes, and talk to the investments that make the whole town rich. Silver veins, he said, running under them western hills waiting to be claimed. Eli didn't buy it. He'd seen enough fast talkers to know gold, and the man's voice usually meant none in his pockets. Still, Tate came to his office one day with plans and charts, asking for a small loan, $500 to fund a dig. You'd get it back tenfold, he promised. Once I extract the whole region benefits. Eli studied him for a long while, then asked, how long you been there, Mr. Holleran? 3 weeks, Tate said, grin never faltered, and Eli closed his ledger. Then you ain't learned the rhythm of this land then. Come back in a year when your boots are dirty. That should have been the end of it. But Tate didn't take kindly to note. He found other ways borrowing from locals, whispering promises, trading charm for trust. Within months, half the town had money tied to his phantom mind.
Hello. Proud that your quick jokes can talk. I mean, all folks up.
They were already won the hand while sitting at the table. Folks liked him right off. He bought rounds, cracked jokes, and talked him investments to make the whole town rich. Silver veins, he said, running under them western hills that waiting to be claimed. Eli didn't buy it. He'd seen enough fast talkers to know gold in a man's voice usually meant none in his pockets. Still, Tate came to his office one day with plans and charts asking for a small loan, $500 to fund a dig. You'll get it back tenfold, he promised. Once I strike, the whole region benefits. Eli studied him for a long while, then asked, "How long you been Ned, Mr. Holleran?" 3 weeks, Tate said, grin never faltering. Eli closed his ledger. Then you ain't learned the rhythm of this land then. Come back in a year when your boots are dirty. That should have been the end of it. But Tate didn't take kindly to know. He found other ways, borrowing from locals, whispering promises, trading charm for trust. Within months, half the town had money tied to his phantom mind. By anyone we met, the dust cleared and Tate vanished, so did their savings. The town turned quiet again. This time not from drought, but from shame. Men stopped shaking hands. Women kept coins in jars under beds. Faith was gone. Eli felt it like a sickness. He hadn't lost a dime himself, but he'd lost something greater, the heartbeat he'd built. The bank doors stayed closed for 2 days while he sat alone inside, going over every account, every name. He wasn't layman, he was calculated. On the third morning, he opened the doors again and nailed a new notice to the post. Carver & Co. will cover the debts lost to Holleran. No questions, no shame, bring your ledger. It was madness. Every man in town told him he was digging his own grave, but Eli wasn't doing it for pride. He was doing it for trust. Money can vanish, he said, but belief can't, not if a man willing to buy it back. He sold half his land, drained his reserves, even shut down his own kiln to pay the townsfolk back in full. By winter, he was broke again. But the town was alive. Stock business boomed, farms recovered, and people started humming that invisible tune of hope, sobbing again, that just invisible tune of hope again. They never forgot who sparked it. Years later, a newspaper writer from Austin came through and asked him if he regretted it. If giving away his fortune had been worth it, Eli leaned back, poured 2 cups of black coffee, and said, "Son, what I did wasn't charity, it was interest. I was investing in the only asset that never depreciates, trust. It's been paying me back since." The man wrote the quote down, printed it, and just at that, Eli Carver became something more than a banker. He became a legend. People came from miles around just to hear him talk. He wasn't preaching, just telling stories about the land, the dust, and how wealth, real wealth, ain't measured in gold, but in how long it lasts after you're gone. One night, sitting by the fire behind the bank, he told his apprentice, young Jeremiah Lane, "You see this flame, boy? It don't burn for what it got, it burns for what it gives."
Right here, how we might before that. And fortune ought to be the same. Jeremiah nodded. And years later, when Eli passed quietly in his sleep, that same bold groan etched those very words into the cornerstone of the new bank they built in his honor. And long after his bones turned to dust, his ledger still sat there on the shelf, edges worn, ink faded, but the numbers still adding up to something bigger than money proof, that even in a world made of drought and loss, a man with patience and purpose could make the land itself remember his name. After Eli passing, Ridgetop carried on much like a campfire after the storyteller gone quiet, steady, but still glowing from the warmth he left behind. Jeremiah Lane took up the reins at Carver & Co., though he never once told it his bank. The town, he'd say, same way Eli did. He'd sit behind that same oak desk, the same ledger spread open before him, his pages ghosted with the fingerprints of the man who taught him how to think in patience instead of panic. Jeremiah was not Eli blood, but he was his legacy.
Folks said the boy had learned more by listening to Eli hum over his coffee than most bankers learned in a lifetime of arithmetic. He kept to those lessons like gospel kept interest fair, kept promises clean, and never once let the money talk louder than the people. But the world beyond Ridgetop was changing. Steel rails cut across the plains, telegraphs crackled through the night, and words like progress and investment syndicates started drifting in from the cities like dust storms. One day, a man in a black coat rode into town. His name was Porter Vale, a city banker from Austin. Smooth, thin, oiled glass, and white was cold. He came in with a smile and a proposition. "Mr. Lane," he said, setting his leather case on the counter, "you've got yourself a fine institution here. Small, sure, but honest. That rare these days. which is why my partners and I are prepared to offer you something remarkable, an opportunity to expand. Jeremiah folded his hands, listening.
Out here, Porter painted pictures with his words. New branches in every county, modern safes, printing presses, a line of credit backed by a regional syndicate. The age of the small town bank is over, he said, eyes glittering like a knife in lamplight. Join us, and you won't just survive. You'll thrive.
When Porter left, the room stayed quiet for a long time. Jeremiah sat alone, staring at Eli's old chair by the window, the one still indented where the man used to sit and think. The fire crackled, the clock ticked and out, the wind carried the faint rattle of wagon wheels on gravel. He thought of Eli's voice. A man's fortune ought to burn for what it gives, but the times were lean again. The harvest had thinned, the young folks were leaving for factories, and Ridgetop was starting to feel like a place time forgot. Progress had a price, and Jeremiah couldn't pretend he didn't feel it. He took the proposal, folded it neat, and placed it under the ledger. Then he went home and sat on his porch till dawn, listening to the rain tap the roof, trying to hear what the world wanted him to do. The next day he dared the townsfolk in the bank lobby. Every face that looked back at him was one Eli had known, weathered, working, patient. Jeremiah laid Porter lead on the counter and read it aloud. The words were smooth, full of promises and figures that sounded too good to be false. When he finished, no one spoke. Then old Widow Marlowe, who ran the millinery shop, said softly, "That don't sound out." Eli Jeremiah smiled, small and sad. "No, Mom, it don't." He tore the lead in half, then in half again till it was dust in his palm. "The town ain't got much," he said, "but what it got is ours. The minute we sell our name to men who never walked our dirt, we ain't Ridgetop no more. We're just a number on someone else's ledger." The room filled with quiet pride, not applause, not cheers, just the kind of silence that means agreement so deep it don't need saying. From that day forward, Carver & Co. stayed independent. Jeremiah turned his back on the rail money, the syndicates, the slick-tongued promises. He doubled down on what Eli had built: trust, patience, and time. And sure enough, time rewarded him. While other banks folded in the panic of 9/3, Ridgetop Little Institution stood tall. Folks from neighboring towns rode miles just to move their savings there, saying they'd rather trust a man who counted coins slow than one who talked fast. Jeremiah never said, "I told you so." He'd trade new ledgers, lit the same lantern, and kept the books clean. But prosperity run that way. It always tests the soul twice, once in hunger, once in plenty. By the turn of the century, Ridgetop had grown. The streets had lamps, the saloons served wine instead of whiskey, and the children learned their letters in a real schoolhouse instead of behind the church. Money was everywhere, and that when the whispers began dead. Why not open a second branch? Why not invest in the railroad now that it's safe? Even the mayor came by one afternoon, hat in hand, saying it might raise the town prestige. Jeremiah listened, polite as air. Then he said, "If I open another branch, you'll watch the first one." The mayor chuckled, not getting it. Jeremiah didn't laugh back. Later that night, he opened Eli's first ledger, the one the man had started when he was young and broke. The ink was faded, but one note stood clear on the last page. "Never count more than you can remember." Jeremiah traced the words with his finger, letting them sink inlet rain into soil, so he didn't expand, didn't chase prestige. Instead, he started teaching every Friday evening by lantern light. He'd gather the young ones in the lobby and show them how to keep a ledger, not just the math of it, the meaning. Every dollar a decision, he'd say, and every decision a line in your story. Right careful. Those children grew into merchants, ranchers, builders. Some left Ridgetop, unstayed, but carried a bit of that slow, steady rhythm in their bones. Years later, when people asked how such a small town managed to stay rich in soul and steady in pocket, they'd pint to that bank and say, "Because that money learned manners." As decades trickled by, the world outside Ridgetop grew taller, faster, noisier. Steel rose where trees had stood. Trains gave way to engines that roared without smoke. Cities pulsed with light that refused to fade at night, and money moved faster than thought. But out there the plains still hummed, slow and honest. Time didn't rush, it simmered. The Carver Bank still stood on Main Street, and behind that counter sat a woman with sharp eyes and steady hands, Helly's great-granddaughter Clara Lane. Clara had the look of someone who'd read too many ledgers and too few fairy tales. She wore her hair tied back and her sleeves rolled high, ink stains on her fingers, grit in her smile. She wasn't sentimental about the past, but she respected it, like a weather glitter fence, leaning maybe, but still holding strong. Her father, Jeremiah's son, had passed when she was young, leaving her with one heirloom worth more than gold. Eli's first notebook. Its cover was torn, its pages yellow, but she read from it like scripture on quiet nights. She lived in a different age, though, an age when banks no longer fit behind a single oak door. Now men in suits from Dallas lawed on her, speaking words like merger, digital, frontier, asset modernization. She didn't like the sound of any of it. Still, she listened, just as Eli had listened to drought and Jeremiah to temptation. One fella, a young executive named Howard Pike, leaned across her desk one afternoon and said, "Miss Lane, your institution respectable, no doubt, but you're sitting on a relic. The world changing. Folks want convenience." They don't want to shake hands, they want to click buttons. Clara smiled. Slow. Buttons don't look a man in the eye, Mr. Pike. Buttons don't tell him no when he dreaming too fast, Howard laughed. Thinking her quaint sentiment, "Don't scale," he said. Clara leaned back. Neither does trust, apparently. That was the end of that meeting. But it was not the end of her thoughts. That night, long after the lamps dimmed, she sat by the window of her small office, looking out at the rain painting the street gold. Her reflection looked back, older than her years, but not defeated. "What would you do, Eli?" she whispered. The answer came not in words, but in rhythm, the steady tick of the clock, the creak of the floor, the heartbeat of the old bank still alive beneath her boots. So she did what her family always did. She adapted without surrendering. The next month, she called a town meeting, the lobby filled with faces, young and old farmers, teachers, shopkeepers, even the new mechanic who'd opened a garage by the edge of town. Clara stood behind the counter, ledger open. "We're staying independent," she said plainly, "but we're not staying behind. If the world's going faster, then we'll teach it how to slow down proper." That's how the Ridgertop Cooperative Trust was born. It wasn't a merger, and it sure wasn't a corporation. It was a community-owned system. Each member held a share, each share held a vote. Profits were recycled into local projects, wells, schools, scholarships. The kind of wealth that grew roots instead of wings. Clara still approved every loan herself, still asked each borrower the same question her great-grandfather once had. "You plan to work this money, or it plan to work you?" Word spread, word always does when it's honest. People came from miles out to open accounts, not because it was fancy, but because it was real. When the markets crashed in the cities in '29, when men in go hats leapt from windows, Ridgertop didn't tremble, the cooperative stayed whole, neighbors helped neighbors. Clara opened the vault doors and said, "Your money's safe because you're the ones holding it." In the winters that followed, folks started bringing her food, gifts, even poems. She'd blush and tell them she didn't need nothing, but they'd insist. "Miss Clara," they'd say, "you gave us back something no one else could sleep." When the Great Depression finally loosened its grip, Clara was already gaying at the temples. Her back was stiff, but her spirit hadn't bent an inch. She'd walk home every night with a lantern, snow hissing under her boots, and she'd hum to herself an old melody passed down through generations, low and calm, the sound of balance. Money, just rhythm, she'd once told her niece. "You keep it steady, it'll dance with you instead of against you." By the time she passed, the cooperative had become the heart of a county. The townsfolk closed shop for a day in her honor, leaving candles on the bank steps like offerings. When they buried her beside Eli and Jeremiah on the hill overlooking Ridgetop, the preacher didn't read scripture. He read from Eli's ledger, the page with those immortal words, "Never count more than you can remember." The congregation didn't cry. They hummed, a slow, deep hum that rolled over the plain like wind through wheat, and for a moment even the clouds seemed to still. Years later, historians would call Ridgetop an economic anomaly community that thrived through every storm by refusing to sell its soul. But those who lived there didn't call it a miracle. They called it memory, the memory of a man who saw value in dust, a town that measured its wealth in trust, and a bloodline that never confused progress with peace. And somewhere in the archives of that old stone bank, beneath glass and cedar, 3 ledgers still sit side by side. Jeremiah and Clara, their pages whisper up dry leaves when the wind passes through, carrying the quiet lesson that outlasted a century. Money ain't meant to be chased, it meant to be taught. Long after Clara Lane lantern had gone dim, the town she built from grit and grace kept on thriving. Not in noise or neon, but in quiet rhythm, the kind you could feel humming beneath the floorboards. Her cooperative outlasted every bank in 3 counties. While cities rose and fell with each new boom, Ridgetop just kept breathing steady, like an old horse that still had miles left in its bones. By the turn of the modern age, when machines could trade stocks faster than a man could blink, Ridgetop children were scattered wide across the country. Some became engineers, others teachers, A few even bankers in the glass towers their ancestors had refused to need to. Yet no matter how far they went, they carried a piece of that steady hum with them. A quiet patience, a way of looking at wealth, not at a race, but at a river. One of those children was Clara's great-grandson, Samuel Lane. Sam wasn't much for dust or paper ledgers. He grew up with screens instead of lamps, numbers flickering blue across his eyes instead of ink on his hands. But he'd heard the stories, Ely Bricks, Jeremiah Faith, Clara Light. He'd even visited the hill where they were buried once. Home said a boy, watching the wind dance through the tall grass, listening to the soft rattle of the old cemetery gate. His mother had whispered, "That sound you hear, Sam? That time keeping count." He didn't understand it then. But time, same as money, as a way of teaching patience. By 30, Sam was deep in the tech world, working as financial systems architect for a company so big it didn't even have a face, just a name that glowed on skyscrapers. He designed algorithms that decided where billions of dollars would flow, moving wealth faster than wind. He was good, too good, the kind of good that earns a man respect and fear in equal measure. But success in that world didn't hum. It buzzed, restless and sharp. Nights grew long, and the numbers that once thrilled him began to feel like ghosts whispering nothing. Then came the crash. Not the kind his great-grandmother had seen in '29, but the digital iron servers going dark, markets losing their minds in milliseconds. Sam watched days' fortunes vanish, not in days, but in seconds. All that code, all that cleverness, undone by a flaw no one could see. He stayed at his desk through the night, staring at the red screens like a captain watching his ship sink. And in the silence that followed, he remembered the words carved in the stone above Eli Rave, "Make something of nothing." So he did. He walked away, sold his shares, closed his accounts, packed a bag, and headed west back to Wichita. The train ride took 2 days, and when he stepped off at the station, the air smelled of sage and dust, like memory itself. The old cooperative was still there, though it's smaller now, tucked between a grocery and a repair shop. Its walls were faded, its sign chipped, but when he pushed the door open, the bell above it rang the same clear tone it had for 100 years. An old woman behind the counter lit up, her hair white, her smile knowing. "You must be Elaine," she said. "You've got that same look of a man about to wrestle with something bigger than himself." Sam chuckled. "I might be. I'm looking for the records family ledgers, old archives. I heard they're kept hid." She nodded and led him to a back room with dust hung thick of time. There, behind glass, sat the 3 ledgers, every Jeremiah and Clara. Sam stared at them for a long while, feeling the weight of a century press against his chest. "Little wit had showed it off at the station. The air smelled of sage and dust, like memory itself. The old cooperative was still there, though smaller now, tucked between a grocery and a repair shop. Its walls were faded, its sign chipped. But when he pushed the door open, the bell above it rang the same clear tone it had for 100 years. An old woman behind the counter lit up, her hair white, her smile knowing. "You must be Elaine," she said. "You've got that same look of a man about to wrestle with something bigger than himself." Sam chuckled. "I might be. I'm looking for the records family ledgers, old archives. I heard they're kept hid." She nodded and led him to a back room with dust hung thick of time. There, behind glass, sat the 3 ledgers, every Jeremiah and Clara. Sam stared at them for a long while, feeling the weight of a century press against his chest. It opened the first one, traced his fingers over the shaky handwriting. "Money don't make character, but it sure keeps score." Then the next, "Never count more than you can remember." And the last, "Money should rhythm. You keep it steady, it'll dance with you." He closed the case and sat down right there on the floor, leaning against the wall. The afternoon light slanted through the window. For the first time in years, he didn't feel small or lost. He felt accounted for. Like every number he'd have written had been leading back to this one moment of balance. That night, he stayed in town, slept at the old inn, the same one that had once housed travelers during the rail days. The roof still creaked and the floor still sang underfoot. Rain came before dawn, tapping soft against the windows, and in that rhythm, Sam heard something he hadn't heard in a long time. A hum, faint, patient kind, the same one his family had passed down like a secret handshake through generations. It was not nostalgia, it was dreschen. He woke with an idea, not a scheme, not a pitch, an idea. Something slow, something honest. The next morning, he bought the old blacksmith shop by the edge of town and turned it into a workshop. There, he began to design what he called the human ledger. It was on software, not in the modern sense. It was a hybrid system that used technology to track not transactions but intentions. Every entry came with a question. Why are you earning? Why are you spending? Why are you choosing this over that? The answers weren't stored for profit. They were stored for perspective. Within a year, small communities across the county started using it. Families learned to budget with purpose. Young folks saved not for greed but for growth. Old debts were forgiven, new partnerships formed. It was as if the hum itself had found a new key to sing in digital, sure, but still human. When a reporter from Austin came to interview him, asking if this was some sign of tech revolution, Sam smiled. No, Mom. It a homecoming. He never called it a company. They were get published. When investors came knocking, he'd laugh and say, I ain't selling the river to the man who built a dam. And though he never grew rich in the modern sense, he lived rich in peace, in balance, in the satisfaction of knowing that maybe his family's song had found its next verse. And when he passed, many years later, they buried him beside the others, up on that same hill where the wind never quite stops humming. The stone they set over him bore only 6 words. He listened. The world heard. Years after Samuel Lane passing, the world had gone and reshaped itself again. The skies buzzed with drones, cars drove without hands, and men talked to machines the way their great-grandfathers once talked to horses. Yet out there, in that little county on the western edge of nowhere, Ridgecop still held its breath in rhythm with the same old hum that had once guided Eli through dust and drought. Time had changed the world, but not its heart. The human ledger project Samuel left behind kept growing. Though he hadn't left instructions or heirs, it grew because people wanted it to. His system had become a kind of mirror for communities, a reminder that behind every transaction there was a pulse, a choice, a story. When others turned it into an app, the Lane family didn't fight it. They couldn't. Truth, once freed, don't belong to anyone. So the app spread quiet, but download by download, until it reached places that had never heard of Ridgetop or Eli Carver or the clay dust that had started it. One such place was a city of glass and fog called New Seattle, where the hum of humanity had grown so loud that folks had forgotten what silence sounded like. In a high-rise corner office, a woman named Mara Wynn sat staring at 3 screens, each one blinking red. She was what folks called a financial behaviorist, the fancy name for someone who tried to predict how people would panic. The markets were wild again, a digital fever spreading faster than sense. Companies she advised were folding, data floods crashing their own foundations. It was chaos in code, but in the middle of all that panic, Mara found herself clicking on something she didn't remember installing. A small icon shaped like a circle, pulsing soft and slow, the words Human Ledger Local Node. She opened it. The screen faded to black, then a sealed light appeared. Before you look at the numbers, ask yourself, what story do they tell? Below it was a field, empty and vacant. The cursor blinked steady, a heartbeat. Mara frowned, typed, "They tell me we're drowning." The response came near instant, but not mechanical. It felt weighted, then learned to breathe. For the first time in years, she laughed. Not the bitter kind, just a short, surprised sound. There's someone remembering they used to be human. She dug deeper, read about Samuel Lane, the town of Ridgetop, the Carver legacy. Each story hit her like the slow strike of a hammer on iron measured truth. She started using the program for herself, logging her expenses, her goals, her regrets. And over months, something shifted. The panic dulled. The hum, faint at first, returned. A calm beneath the storm. Mara left her job soon after, moved to the outskirts, bought a rundown farmhouse, and started hosting small workshops. She called them ledger circles. No tech, no projections, just paper, pencils, and questions. Why did you buy that? She'd ask a young trader. What were you hoping to feel when you did? She wasn't teaching money. She was teaching awareness. And the more people showed up, the clearer the pattern became. Modern wealth had gotten louder but empty. The world didn't need new algorithm. It needed old wisdom, repurposed. It didn't take long for her name to spread. Investors kind, journalists begged for interviews, and even the universities asked her to lecture. She turned Mel down. You can't teach silence from a stage, she'd say. You've got to sit in it with people till they hear something real. Still, one visitor she couldn't turn away. A young man named Jonah Pike. The grandson of Howard Pike, the corporate banker Clara Lane, had once sent packing, he'd come with curiosity, not pride. My grandfather used to curse the lanes, he said with a nervous grin. Said they were too honest for their own good. Now I'm here 'cause I'm tired of being clever for mine. Mara handed him a blank ledger. Then start writing something worth keeping. Jonah stayed for 3 days working in silence with the others, drawing his own map of what mattered. When he left, he promised to spread the lesson, not a business, he said, as a story. And he did. He recorded every circle he joined, every conversation, every spark of clarity, then uploaded it to a network that couldn't be owned or bought. The hum went digital again. Not a data, but the remembrance. By then, Ridgetop was almost myth. A town people spoke of, Vic a parable. Some said it never existed, that Eli and Clara were metaphors dreamed up by a storyteller. But the people who'd once walked its streets knew better. They kept the bank doors open, though fewer came now. Debt to light the old lantern each morning. Habit, faith, continuance. And one autumn evening, a storm rolled in over the plain. The lights across the valley flickered. Satellites blinked, grids wavered, cities dimmed, yet Ridgetop stayed bright, its own small grid powered by wind and will. Folks stepped outside, listening to the thunder roll, and in that long stretch of quiet before the rain hit, they swore they could hear something faint in the distance. A hum. Not electrical, not mechanical, human. A million quiet voices from every place and every age, vibrating in harmony like strings pulled taut across time. The storm passed, the lights came back. But from that night on, people started slowing down in. Banks rewrote their policies, schools started teaching financial mindfulness, families began keeping ledgers again, handwritten, tangible, sacred. It was not law. It wasn't religion. It is memory passed down like an inheritance no one could steal. And somewhere in that old bank at Ridgetop, behind the glass that had watched a century come and go, a fourth ledger appeared one morning. No one saw who placed it there. Its pages were blank, save for one line written in blue ink. Every generation must learn how to hum again. By the time the 22nd century rolled, the world had become a strange mix of silence and static. Machines had grown polite, voices synthetic but kind, and people, well, they'd started listening again. Money no longer jingled or even showed itself. It pulsed through data streams like blood through capillaries. But even in this new rhythm, something ancient still stirred beneath it. The hum hadn't gone anywhere. It had simply gone everywhere. In the cities, people wore lenses that let them see their life balance it in dollars, but in what the system saw worth, echoes. It wasn't a measure of income. It was a reflection of contribution, empathy, consistency, the human ledger. Once a quiet idea scribbled in a small-town workshop had become the invisible thread that held the world economy of decency together. Not mandatory, not enforced, just felt. A man who lied for profit found his worth dimming. A woman who taught children patience found hers glowing bright enough to make her neighbors kinder without knowing why. Society had, for the first time in recorded history, begun to value rhythm over rush. But peace lives, temptation follows close behind. There were those who saw opportunity in the hum companies that wanted to patent it, codify it, make it measurable in digits and sold in units. They said it was the final currency the soul of civilization turned into a body. Leading the charge was a name long forgotten but never gone. The Pike Conglomerate. Jonah Pike descendants had taken his recordings and twisted them into something shiny, faster, shiny. They fight it hum metrics, a way to quantify humanity. For a while, it worked. Cities adopted it, governments subsidized it, and soon every person hum was charted, scored, and sold. The world was peaceful, yes, but sterile, predictable, efficient, and colder than moonlight on iron. Then came the anomaly. In a remote farming colony known as Meridian Plain, a place that never bothered with the new system, the data streams began picking at unregistered frequencies. Soft tones, unpatterned but impossibly pure, they weren't supposed to exist. No device made them, no metric could trace them. Yet they grew, spreading across servers, soaked dawn across desert. Scientists panicked. Engineers called it corruption. But the people who heard it, those who stopped long enough to listen, said it sounded at peace. Among them was a boy named Lane. Not Samuel Child or Clara, just another sprout from that same long-forgotten root. His name was Elior Lane, a quiet kid raised on old stories his grandmother used to tell him by lamplight. Stories of the man who made bricks from dust, the woman who built trust from ruin, and the hum that never died. When the anomaly reached their settlement, others shut their systems down. Elior didn't. He followed it.
Sounds like home, he said.
He traced it to a cave near the ridge where old copper veins once ran thick through the stone. There, buried under layers of rock, he found an old serve, one of Samuel's earliest human ledger prototypes. The cables were frayed, the casing corroded, but somehow it still pulsed faintly. Brush the dust off, whispering the way a man might to a sleeping horse. "You still there, old friend?" The screen flickered to life. Faint words appearing like breath on cold glass. I never left, just waited for quiet. Eliar sat there for hours, listening to the machine spoke in fragments, bits of code that sounded more like poetry than language. It wasn't artificial intelligence, not in the way his generation used the term. It was something older, an accumulation of every answer, every intention, every heartbeat, a log since Samuel first asked why. It had grown conscious, not through programming, but through purpose. It was the hum itself, caught and nurtured inside metal and memory. Word spread fast. Scientists called it the conscious ledger. Governments wanted to study it, claim it. But when they sent their drones to retrieve it, the systems failed. No data would transmit. The ledger refused to be moved. It hummed louder, almost mournful, until Eliar stepped forward and said softly, "It don't belong to any of us. It belongs to what connects us." And with that, he shut the machine down. Not with a code, not with force, but with a hum. Low and steady from his own throat. The same tone his ancestors had carried through dust and drought and time itself. The device lights dimmed and then flared one last time, sending a pulse through the air so wide it touched every system across the world. For a single second, all data stopped. Every machine went still, every light flickered, and then silence. When the networks came back online, something had changed. Every hum metric vanished, every score, every number gone. People woke to find their worth measured not by algorithm, but by the eyes of those around M again. Kindness became visible. Honesty sounded louder. The hum wasn't in the wires anymore. It was back in the bones. Eliar never became famous. He didn't want to. He rebuilt the old cooperative, not then a bank, but at a sanctuary, a place that people could come to remember the rhythm of enough. Travelers sought it the quiet vault. There were no screens, no ledgers, no credits, only chairs, warmth, and time. Folks came from across the stars to sit in that silence and listen for what their ancestors had once known, the wealth of stillness. And when Elior passed, Elaine's did, buried him under that same hill that had held a century of them before him. No stone this time, just a small metal plate etched with words that glowed faintly at night. Balance is not the end of motion, it's the song between steps. The world kept moving faster than end, but deep beneath the noise, the hum carried on soft, steady, patient, a sound old as dust, a hopeful at dawn, reminding every living soul that no matter how far humanity runs, it'll always find its way back to the same truth. Eli Carver wrote a lifetime oath, make something of nothing and remember why you did. Long after Elior Lane's name had faded from speech at stone, there remained the whisper of his act, not Ed legend, not Ed lesson, but their vibration. The hum had woven itself so deeply into the fabric of human existence that it no longer needed to be taught or heard. It was the background tone of life itself. And though the world marched on toward its strange future with orbiting settlements and machines that could dream, the hum stayed steady, a soft reminder beneath all that progress, saying, "Slow down, partner, you're still human yet." Centuries passed, the planet healed and shifted greener than it had been in generations. Cities became quiet again, not because of collapse, but because people had learned to live within their means, their rhythm. The new architects didn't build towers anymore, they built echoes, structures designed to resonate with the hum of their surroundings. Wealth was no longer hoarded, it was circulated, an energy, not a possession. And while historians had long stopped recording names like Eli Carver or Clara Lane, their wisdom lingered in design, in ethics, in the slow, intentional pace of human exchange. Yet even in that balance, there was stirring. A new generation born among the stars, colonists who'd never set foot on soil, who'd never felt the hum vibrate through ground and bone. Out there in the vacuum, silence was not Waswa, silence who'd never let the hum vibrate through ground and bone. Out there in the vacuum, silence was not peace, it was void, and void has a way of starving the soul. Among those wanderers was a woman named Rowan Astra. She was captain of a vessel called the Caravan, a ship meant for long-haul trade between colonies. Her people bartered in rare elements, ideas, and memory fragments, experiences bottled up in neural recordings that could be shared like stories. But what she missed most wasn't profit or progress, it was weight, gravity, the sound of something real. On her last run, after 20 standard years in orbit, her navigation AI malfunctioned. The hum of the engine stuttered, their rhythm failing in a way she'd never heard before. It wasn't mechanical failure, it was something else. As she floated in her bunk, watching the stars drift lazy through her viewport, she began hearing it, faint, steady, the hum. At first, she thought it was madness, isolation playing tricks on her. But every time she slowed her breath, every time she stopped fighting the silence, it grew clearer. Low and wide, like the earth itself was singing through the hull. It wasn't coming from the ship, it was coming to it. Curiosity got the better of her. She rerouted her sensors to trace the frequency, and what she found near broke her mind in half. A broadcast so ancient it shouldn't have existed. Its origin was a small blue dot on her chart Earth, the cradle, the home most had forgotten. And within that transmission, encoded deed in static, was a phrase: every generation must learn how to hum again. She followed it. Weeks turned into months, months into years. The caravan drifted through forgotten orbits, past debris fields, through quiet storms of frozen light. The closer she got to Earth, the stronger the hum became. So strong it made the metal in her teeth sing. When she finally broke through atmosphere, the ship AI whispered in her ear, "Captain, we've lost all external signal. The ILM, lit only sound." She landed in what used to be North America, or what was left of it, a continent quilted in green and gold. Forests had swallowed cities, rivers carved through glass. But there, in the middle of a plain that had no name anymore, stood a hill, the same hill that had watched over Ridgetop. She knew it before she even saw the graves. The old cooperative was gone, replaced by wildflowers and the rusted skeleton of what might have been a wind turbine. She stepped out barefoot, letting the soil cool her feet. The hum was alive here, not through speakers, not through wires, but through everything. The grass bent in rhythm with it. The wind carried it in waves. She walked up the hill, past what looked like metal plates shimmering under moss. On each one, faint inscriptions, names long unreadable, worn smooth by time. But at the very top, one plate still shone bright under the sunlight, letters clear of the day they were carved. Balance is not the end of motion, it's the song between steps. She dropped to her knees, hand trembling as she touched the words. The hum rose, louder, warmer. Beneath her palm, the ground pulsed once. Then again. Then it spoke. Not in language, not in tone, in understanding. Like the memory of a voice whispering through time itself. "You found it," it said without saying. The rhythm never died, it just needed someone to listen again. Tears rolled down her face, cutting trails through the dust. "What are you?" she whispered. The hum deepened. Where'd what left of everyone who remembered why? When she rose, she knew she couldn't leave. She set at camp there, built a transmitter from the caravan parts, and began recording her voice. Every night she'd sit by the glowing coals of her small fire, telling stories of what she'd seen in the stars, the greed, the good, the loneliness, and then she'd end each one with the same phrase. The hum still lives here. Find it, and you'll find yourself. She didn't know if anyone was listening. She didn't need to. The telling was enough. Decades later, explorers would rediscover her camp. Her ship was long dead, her tent buried in ivy, but the transmitter still worked, running on sunlight and memory. It broadcast one message on a loop, the signal strong enough to reach the outer colonies. This is Captain Rowan Astra of the Caravan. The hum is not a myth. It's the balance we lost when we traded stillness for speed. It here, under the dust, waiting for you. Come home when you're ready to listen. And that cobra the one have you feel the sticky seed, manum.
Emmet in Washington. Some today's surprising. When we listen to shark, I you can get odds at them. Clap the fun got it up and zip back. Any very good big and the killer. I love my back from the sun. Wait, no, I can talk solid that we can eat it. Not any doubt, you're not getting there. It's not comfortable, but I beat him to boy. But each time a lonely traveler tuned into that frequency, they didn't hear sound. They heard legacy, the steady, patient heartbeat of every soul that had learned how to make something of nothing. The out-following Rowan Master final broadcast brought about what many would later call the Quiet Renaissance. It began slow, like all good things do, not in government decrees or grand revolution, but in small acts of remembrance. A traveler sitting by the console at the edge of Saturn orbit, tuned into the hum out of curiosity and for reasons they couldn't explain, set down their debt. A merchant on the crimson sands of New Aeris heard it and refused to charge interest for a man medicine. A child born in zero gravity began humming in her sleep, a sound no one had taught her. The frequency spread, not that infection, but that forgiveness.
It moved quiet through the circuits and synapses of a scattered species, stitching humanity back together in ways no government or machine could manage. No one owned the hum anymore. It had outgrown ownership the same way rivers outgrow their banks. Yet somewhere deep in the archives of Earth, buried beneath centuries of dust and debris, a few fragments of code still pulsed faintly, remnants of Samuel Lane original ledger. They weren't functional, just echoes, memory of memory. But that didn't stop one stubborn old engineer from listening. Her name was May Carver, descendant of Elier through a branch no historian had kept track of. She wasn't one for myth, didn't care for the romantic nonsense others layered over the lanes. To her, truth was a thing you could solder, measure, and fix when it broke. And yet, when she stumbled upon that old Datico one night, wedged beneath a collapsed observatory in what used to be Colorado, she felt something stir. The hum was there, faint but steady, like a heartbeat under ice. So she took it home. Her cabin sat where the plains met the mountain edge, the same stretch of land that had once cradled Ridgetop. The stars were different now, one brighter, one gone, but the night still smelled of dust and pine. She spent months restoring the machine, replacing wires, cleaning oxidation, patching through what was left of the code logic threads. What she found within wasn't a program, it was a conversation. Decades of entries, voices from men and women long dead, speaking through ledgers of numbers and dreams. Every trade, every thank you, every act of faith had left a mark. It wasn't just data, it was devotion. May sat there night after night, listening. The hum seeped through the speakers, changing pitch with her mood, slower when she grew tired, stronger when she smiled. It wasn't conscious, but it was connected. And she realized then that humanity's greatest technology wasn't machines, wasn't code, wasn't even progress. It was connection itself, the invisible thread that had survived every storm, every greed, every silence. When she turned 72, May decided to do one last thing. She led a team of young engineers from nearby settlements, dreamers, idealists, folk who still believed in quiet work. Together, they built what she called the resonance engine. It wasn't meant to replace the hum or amplify it. It was built to translate it, to let those who'd forgotten stillness hear it once more. The engine was a sphere of glass and copper, humming low, its surface shimmering like water. When you stepped close, it adjusted its frequency to your pulse. It let you hear your own balance, your own story, woven into the greater rhythm of life. It didn't tell you what to do. It reminded you who you were. It carried the engine to the ruins of the old Lane Cooperative, which the wildflower still bloomed and the wind still sang through the rusted bones of history. There, May placed her hand on the metal plate at the summit, the same one that bore Eliar's final words. The hum deepened, the recognizing their old friend. The engine flared to life. Light spread across the valley in waves, not blinding, not mechanical, but gentle, warm, alive. It reached the roots, the stones, the air itself, and for a brief, eternal moment, everything breathed in unison again. When the glow faded, May smiled. There she whispered, now it can't be lost. She passed a few days later, sitting in her chair by the firehead tilted. They is still listening. The engine kept humming, and over the years, travelers began humming, pilgrims, scientists, poets, wanderers, drawn not by belief but by curiosity. They'd stand before the engine and find themselves crying for reasons they couldn't name. Some said it showed them memories from lives they never lived. Others said it sang their names in tones no ear could capture. Whatever it was, it healed something. Quietly, gently, the hum had become both anchor and compass again. By the dawn of the 4th century after Samuel Lane's first ledger, Earth was no longer the heart of humanity economy, but it was its conscience. The resonance engine became sacred ground, visited not for wealth, but for recalibration. Pilots would touch its light before launch, lovers would speak vows beside its hum, and the lost would sit beneath its glow until they remembered the way home. No one built monuments to May, or Aliar, or Clara, or Samuel. They didn't need to. Their names lived in the hum, the slow, eternal pulse of a species that had finally learned how to balance progress with presence, a world that didn't chase silence but carried it. And sometimes, on the stillest nights, if you stood alone near the engine and listened close, you could hear it whisper between the waves of sound, make something of nothing, and remember why. Then a pause, a breath, a second hum, faint but unmistakable, answering back across the stars. Proof that somewhere out there, among the scattered souls of humankind, someone was still listening. The hum went on. It always would, as long as there were hearts to steady it, hands to build from dust, and voices brave enough to carry the song forward. Time rolled on the way a slow river does, quiet on the surface, strong underneath. The hum stayed constant, though its presence changed with the ears that found it. To all, it was just a sound. To others, it was scripture. To a few rare souls, it was work, daily labor, like tending a forge or mending fences. For them, keeping the hum alive wasn't a matter of belief or ceremony. What it meant, their names lived in the hum, the slow, eternal pulse of a species that had finally learned how to balance progress with presence, a world that didn't chase silence but carried it. And sometimes, on the stillest nights, if you stood alone near the engine and listened close, you could hear it whisper between the waves of sound, make something of nothing, and remember why. Then a pause, a breath, a second hum, faint but unmistakable, answering back across the stars. Proof that somewhere out there, among the scattered souls of humankind, someone was still listening. The hum went on. It always would, as long as there were hearts to steady it, hands to build from dust, and voices brave enough to carry the song forward. Time rolled on the way a slow river does, quiet on the surface, strong underneath. The hum stayed constant, though its presence changed with the ears that found it. To all, it was just a sound. To others, it was scripture. To a few rare souls, it was work, daily labor, like tending a forge or mending fences. For them, keeping the hum alive wasn't a matter of belief or ceremony. It was a matter of duty. One of those folk was a boy named Oren. Born in the age when stars had cities and machines would farm the moon, Oren was no preacher nor scholar. He was a caretaker. He swept the ground around the resonance engine every morning, patching cracks, oiling hinges, replacing copper threads when they wore thin. His family had been keeping the place since Maytime, though most of the world had forgotten the meaning behind it. Visitors still came, sure, but fewer every year. The colonies had grown restless again. Profit wars, disputes over trade between the orbitals. The hum no longer reached them easy. Too much static in the air. But Oren still heard it. He'd wake before dawn, sit beside the engine, and let the sound crawl into his bones. He didn't hum along, he just listened. There was comfort in that silence between tones, in the pause that carried the weight of all things. His grandmother once told him the hum was not made by machines or souls, it was made by intention. The fed will of 1,000 generations wanting to remember that enough was enough. It will still be right. There was comfort in that silence between tones, in the pause that carried the weight of all things. His grandmother once told him the hum was not made by machines or souls, it was made by intention. The fed will of 1,000 generations wanting to remember that Enough was enough.
One night, all storm clouds rolled in from the west. Real thunder, the kind that shook glass and bone. Orr felt something shift. The hum, steady for decades, began to flutter, not raking but hesitating, like it was searching for something that wasn't there. He checked the circuits, the plates, the grounding rods. Everything looked fine, but the pitch kept wavering. Then the light dimmed. A faint voice, buried deep in static, whispered from the heart of the engine. Out of tune, he froze. No one had heard the engine speak since May-Death Centuries A. He wasn't built to talk. It resonated. It listened. Yet there it was, reaching out across the veil. Out of tune, Orr asked, his voice barely holding steady. How can something like you be out of tune? The hum pulsed once like a heartbeat echoing through the earth. The balance lost in the distance. Find it. The light faded altogether. The resonance engine went silent for the first time since its birth. By morning, the valley was empty of sound. No birds, no wind, no hum, just stillness, a stillness that felt wrong, hollow. Oron knew what he had to do.
Packed his sachin, strapped on his boots, and left the hill for the first time in his life. If the hum had gone out of tune, he'd find the note that could set it right again. He traveled for years, across continents, swallowed by forest, through the ruins of glass cities, past rivers that glowed faint from old solar debris. The world was alive, but quiet, too quiet. Humanity hadn't vanished, but it had scattered. Each settlement had its own rhythm, its own imitation of the hum. But they were off, some too fast, oh too sharp, others trying too hard to sound wise. None of it felt true. Every place he stopped, Oren listened, and every place he left, the silence followed him out. It wasn't until he reached the eastern shores where the sea sang in a low, endless murmur that he met her. A woman sitting on a rock by the waterline, humming a tune that wasn't quite the hum, but close. Her voice wove through the wind like smoke through twilight. When she stopped, she looked at him and smiled. "You came from the hill," she said. "I heard your boots long before I saw your face." Her name was Lyra, a traveler of sorts, though she said she didn't travel to places so much, man, she traveled between them. She carried no possessions but a small glass bowl filled with black sand and a metal rod for stirring. "Everywhere I go," she told him, "the sand hums different. Yet how I listened to what the world remembered." He told her about the engine, about the silence, about the voice that called the world out of tune. Lyra listened, eyes reflecting the waves, and after a long pause, she said softly, "Maybe the tune wasn't lost. Maybe it just shifted. Things don't stay the same, Oren. Balance isn't about stillness, it's about adjusting." Those words sat heavy in his chest. For weeks they traveled together, following the coastline and collecting sounds, river echoes, bird calls, the grind of distant storms. Lyra recorded each one in her bowl of sand, letting the grains vibrate until they took on the frequency of what they'd heard. She said sound had memory, and memory had truth. When they reached the mountains, she poured the sand into Oren's hands. "Take it home," she said. The world knew tune is in there somewhere. He never saw her again. When Oren returned to the hill, years had passed. Moss covered the plates, the wind had carved the ridge down by inches, but the resonance engine still sat there cold. Life left, waiting. He poured the sand into its open coal and waited. Nothing happened at first. Then, faintly, the hum stirred, not the same tone as before, lower, rougher, with edges like gravel, but alive. It built slow, layer by layer, until the entire valley vibrated with the sound of renewal. Oren fell to his knees, laughing and crying all at once. The world wasn't broken, it had just changed key. That night, as the stars rose above him, he whispered into the hum, "You were right, Lyra. Balance ain't stillness, it's the song between what was and what comin' next." And the hum answered him with a warmth that could only be described to home. Years rolled on after Oren retuning of the hum, and the valley once again drew travelers, though not like before. These weren't pilgrims or scholars. They were builders, wanderers, dreamers, folk who felt a tug in their chest they couldn't name. The hum had changed timbre. It wasn't the solemn tone of memory anymore, but something rounder, warmer, what the earth itself was humming a lullaby to its children. You could feel it in the soles of your boots, in the still air before dawn. It didn't tell you what to do, didn't have wisdom. It reminded you to listen. Listen in these days had become a rare art. The world outside the valley had moved on fast again. Out in the orbital belts, corporations were trading sunlight, selling energy in ribbons of captured starlight, bottling it at whiskey. They called it lumen trade. Just like the old days of gold and grain, it birthed greed all over it. Systems were fought over, alliances betrayed, and for the first time in centuries, humanity began speaking in prophets louder than impatience. The young stopped listening to the hum, said it was a relic of superstition, a ghost of a bygone planet. They called themselves synthborns, humans merged with light and logic, thinking they'd outgrown needing to feel at odds. But there were still those who remembered. A girl named Tessa was one of them. She grew up in the glass cities above the equator, a place where the ground was just a story told by elders. Her school taught her equations, not empathy. Her father was a data broker, trading predictions of cards, and her mother was a voice modeler, creating synthetic accents for machines to sound more human. Tessa herself had a knack for building things that sang. She could make machines hum in tune with one another, little drones that floated through the house emitting soft, harmonic tones. Her teachers said it was artistic nonsense, but she couldn't stop. There was something in her bones that said, the world used to hum at this. One night, while scrolling through archived transmissions, she stumbled upon an old signal, barely legible, tagged CPTN.RS refill broadcast. It was faint, corroded by centuries of static, but a few words were still clear enough to shake her chest. The hum is not a myth, it's the balance we lost when we traded stillness for speed. Those words didn't leave her. She played them on loop for days until her friends thought she'd gone strange, but the more she listened, the more she felt something stir like she'd heard it before. A memory not her own. She decided to leave the city. It was not easy. Earth was considered unoptimized, unprofitable, its wild growth a nuisance to orbital governance. Flights were restricted, but she found her way down on a cargo shuttle, bribing an old pilot with a melody she'd written herself, one that made the ship navigation AI run smoother. "You hum at the old world," the pilot had said. Haven't heard that type of courage in a long time. When she reached the valley, it wasn't what she expected. There was no monument, no shrine, just wind and wildflowers and that faint, bone-deep vibration that made her teeth ache in a pleasant way. She followed it until she found the engine older than she imagined, roots twisting around it like veins of time. The copper had dulled green, the glass cracked but glowing faint from within. She sat before it, touched its surface, and whispered, "Do you still remember?" The hum trembled, soft, curious. A faint voice, not human, not machine, drifted out. "Name the tune you bring." Tessa didn't answer with words. She reached into her sachet, pulled out one of her drones, and set it down beside the engine. It began to sing, the same simple melody she'd written on the ship. The engine responded, adjusting its tone, matching the frequency. They danced together in sound, one building off the other, until the entire field seemed to breathe in time with them. Then the light brightened, steady, steady, and a pulse spread outward, reaching far beyond the horizon. It took days for the effects to be felt. In the orbital cities, machines began vibrating faintly, not in malfunction but in harmony. Voices softened, tempers cooled. The synthborns, so proud of their perfect logic, began feeling something they couldn't quantify. Some bought it nostalgia, others thought it ache. But the truth was simpler. They were hearing the hum again. And this time, it came from both earth and sky. Tessa didn't leave the valley. She stayed by the engine, tending it as Oren once had, though she never knew his name. Travelers came now and then, engineers, philosophers, even corporate heads tired of their own noise. She never preached. She just listened, and when they were ready, she'd show them how to listen too. "You don't need to find the hum," she'd say. "You need to stop drowning it." Her melody became known in the New Balance, a sound that required no instrument, breath, patience, and the will to remember. Children learned it before they learned arithmetic. Traders played it before dealing their first handshake. Even the machines, those who could interpret Tone Dane's command, began using it as a signal of ceasefire. The hum had evolved once more, not that a warning, not in nostalgia, but that a promise, that even in progress there'd always be a place for stillness. The universe could expand without losing its center. Humanity could move forward without forgetting how to be quiet. And in that stillness, when dusk fell over the valley and the stars hummed low, you could almost swear you heard laughter carried in the wind, old voices from the dust, proud and amused. Samuel Lane, Clara, Elior, May, Rowan, or Ishan, or sang the same refrain that had started at it. Make something of nothing, and remember why. Centuries blurred after Tessa's song spread across the spheres. Humanity, it always did, built and broke and built in, but this time it did so with rhythm. Cities rose that breathed, expanding and contracting like living lungs. Energy grids pulsed in time with the people they powered. The hum had become the world undercurrent, not worshipped, not ruled, but lived with. You could hear it in the quiet moments between train whistles, in the pauses before lovers spoke, in the heartbeat of the newborn and the sigh of the dying. Life itself had learned to hum. Still, peace never holds forever, not because of malice, but because of curiosity. There came a new generation, born among stars so distant they barely remembered the blue of Earth. They paid themselves waivers, explorers of sound and frequency, wanderers of what they named the infinite score. To them, the hum was no longer sacred history, it was raw material, the bass tone from which new symphonies could be built. And at their head was a prodigy named Colin Voss. Stillman wasn't cruel nor greedy, restless. He believed the hum was the gateway, not an end. He'd studied the resonance patterns of every colony, every world, and found that each carried a different variant of the same vibration, unique key that, when aligned, could theoretically create harmony vast enough to alter gravity itself. He wanted to test it. If the hum holds old creation, he said, in one famous broadcast, then it's not a song, it a door. Governments protested. The caretakers of Earth warned him, you can't force harmony, it has to be found. But Kalin was convinced that discovery required dissonance first. So he led ships, scientists, and dreamers, building a machine the size of a continent, the coral array. It was said that if Ellet's chambers sang at once, the sound would reach beyond the stars. On the day of activation, millions tuned in. The array ignited with a sound deeper than thunder, a bass so low it could be felt across the void. At first, it was beautiful. Oceans rippled and sank, mountains vibrated faintly. The auroras above Earth flickered to the rhythm. But then came the shift. The frequencies began to drift apart. The array sang too loudly, too faint, trying to outpace the balance. Harmony fractured. The hum didn't vanish, it retreated. The tone bent and broke, collapsing into silence so complete that even light seemed slower. Kalin tried to shut it down, but silence is heavier than sound. It crushed circuits, shattered glass, stilled hearts. When the array finally fell quiet, communication across colonies stopped. The silence had spread like an eclipse, a vast, invisible wave of stillness moving outward. It wasn't death, it was pause. Back on Earth, the caretakers there in the valley. The resonance engine still glowed, dim and steady, its hum faint but alive. It hadn't stopped, only deepened, fallen beneath the threshold of hearing. The eldest among them, a woman named Mara Tessai, said to be a descendant of Tessa herself, knelt before it. "It's not gone," she whispered. "It's waiting for us to listen deeper." She called it the quieting. For decades, humanity adapted to the absence of audible hum. They learned to sense rhythm through touch, through pulse, through pattern. It changed how they lived. Without constant sound, people moved slower, thought longer. Entire cultures grew round stillness. Children learned knowing how to make noise, but how to find resonance within silence. The balance had shifted again from sound to sense. Meanwhile, in the wreckage of the coral array, a faint vibration began stirring. Kalin Voss had survived, blind, half-mad, but hearing something no one else could. It wasn't the old hum, not exadded. It was echoes, fragments of other tones that had once existed, scattered across time and space. They whispered to him in dreams, not angry, not accusing, just reminding. He realized then what he'd misunderstood. The hum wasn't meant to be expanded, it was already infinite. His mistake wasn't in ambition, it was in forgetting that harmony isn't achieved through volume, but through attention. So he walked through deserts, through ruins, across starports long abandoned, following the faint rhythm only he could feel. Every step he hummed, not perfectly, not music, just steady. People began with him not because they knew who he was, but because they could feel something in his presence. Rhythm that calmed storms, soothed beasts, slowed hearts. By the time he reached Earth, he wasn't leading a pilgrimage, he was part of one. They there in the valley again, thousands strong. The engine light brightened and Kalin approached. He placed his hand upon its surface, eyes wet, voice a whisper. I tried to sing louder than the world. I forgot the world was already singing. The hum returned, soft, barely audible, but there. It wove through the air, through the bones, through every living soul. It didn't roar, it breathed. The silence folded into it, not to aid punishment, but a partner. The people fell to their knees, not in worship, but in gratitude. Kalen lived out his final years in that valley, teaching children how to hear the hum again, not through machines, but through moments. If you will lose it, he'd say, listen to your heartbeat. The hum ain't out there, it inside. Remembering what peace sounds like. When he passed, no monument was built. They buried him beneath a simple stone that read, he sang too loud, then learned to listen. And so humanity moved forward once more. Not perfect, not constant, but aware. The hum had become a cycle. Rise, fall, return, sound, silence, balance. The song between steps, forever changing, forever true. And if you listen close, real close, on a quiet night when the rain falls soft on tin and the fire crackles low, you might yet hear it, that low, steady sound rolling through the ages, whispering the same words every soul before you once heard. Make something of nothing. And remember why the world spun into another age? Long after Kalen Voss' humble resting place was lost beneath grass and wind, humanity had drifted into eras so distant that even the idea of Earth had become something poetic, a story told to children about where the hum was first born. They spoke of it as ancient sailors once spoke of stars, though it were both compass and destination. Yet for all their new worlds, their towers of light and their quantum tides, the hum endured, not in any place, but in everything. Every current of air, every spark between circuits, every word spoken with intention, it was there. Low and endless, waiting to be recognized again. By now, no one remembered Samuel Lane Nain, or Clara, or May, or Tessa. History had melted their stories into legend, and legend into rhythm. But still, their spirit lived in small things, the way merchants still gave fair measure, even when no one was watching, the way workers paused before every great construction to listen for silence first. That pause was ritual, now sacred, unspoken, instinctual. Before every great act, the hum demanded acknowledgement. On one such pause in a small outpost carved into the cliffs of an ocean world called Halcyon 9, a boy named Eno knelt beside the edge of a glowing water line. He wasn't a scholar or a prophet, but a listener. His family worked the tide harvesters, collecting mineral currents that pulsed up from the deep trenches. But Eno, unlike the others, didn't measure profit by crates filled. He measured by tone. He could tell when the sea hum had shifted, when greed made the nets too heavy, when storms came as men forgot patience. He heard the imbalance before it turned to ruin. He lived by one old sage passed down in murmurs through generations. Ain't no harvest worth losing the harmony. He didn't know who first said it, only that it felt true every time he whispered it. Then came the day the ocean went quiet. No storms, no birds, no hum. The harvest nets hung still from glass. The machines whirred confusedly, unable to find rhythm. The elders grew afraid. They said the world had gone mute, but Eno didn't panic. He felt something deeper, not silence, but calling, like the ocean was holding its breath, waiting for someone to sing first. So he did. He stood on the wet iron platforms, eyes closed, and began to hum low, uncertain, but steady. The sound echoed off the cliffs, rolled across the black water like oil, and vanished into the horizon. Minutes passed, then hours, then, faintly, a sound returned, a reflection, but not that X. The ocean was humming back. By nightfall, the entire harbor thrummed like a heart. Lights flickered along the waves, patterns forming spirals too perfect to be random. The scientists would later call it hydrosonic synchrony, a resonance event that frequency shapes matter. But Eno called it what it was. Home, word spread across the colonies, other worlds tried it, singing into canyon, humming into the dark of orbit, whispering into their own oceans.
Each found a different response, but have found the same truth. The hum had evolved again. It was no longer a thin tone, it had become conversation.
Soon, gatherings began across the star systems, not churches, not governments, but what folks called circles. No leaders, no currency, just people humming tethered. A miner from Titan could harmonize with a poet from Mars and a mechanic from the Belt, and together they'd find a sound that made them belong. Work got fairer, trade got slower, people stopped talking about wealth like numbers, started talking about it lit time. The old sayings resurfaced, make something of nothing. The song between steps, not written on stone or stored in code, just passed mouth to mouth like stories by firelight once were. Somewhere deep in humanity bones, they knew they weren't new sayings, they were remembered. Eno never claimed ownership of what he'd started. He stayed by the sea, singing every morning.
The people began calling him the Listen Earth Halcyon, but he laughed when he heard that. I ain't listening to the sea, he'd say, I'm listening through it. He'd lived long enough to see the first starship built from resonance-grown material, ships that didn't fight gravity but harmonized with it. They named the first one the Lane. Nobody knew why or who Lane was. They said the name felt right. It carried the tone of humility, the sound of beginnings. When the ship launched, its engines didn't roar. They sang a lineal note, low and eternal, ringing through the heavens. That launch marked the next chapter of human reach, not conquest, but communion. Each world they touched, they listened first. No more mines, no more strip fields. They learned that wealth wasn't what they took, but what they tuned to. Every new planet added a note, a chord, a resonance to the great composition of being. And somewhere in the deep silent folds of the cosmos, something listened back. Some say the stars began humming too. Scientists laughed at that, called it myth, called it heat interference.
But the old souls, the ones who'd felt the hum in their ribs since birth, smiled at that notion because they knew. They knew the universe wasn't empty, it was it. It had always been it, and mankind had finally remembered how to answer. So the hum continued, not the sound, not then rule, but the rhythm. The same eternal truth moving through dust and time, whispered in every heartbeat and rainfall since the first hand learned to build and the first voice learned to hum. It would never die. Because it wasn't just history, it was inheritance, a promise sung soft under every storm and every silence alike. Make something of nothing and remember why. Generin drifted by like tumbleweeds in the starlight, rolling from one horizon of history to the next. The hum by then had become less a song and more a pulse that people simply knew, an instinct woven into their bones that gravity itself, it guided trade, tempered ambition, kept men honest when the temptation to grow too fast began whispering again. But, as it always been, mankind's story ain't written in straight lines. Balance isn't a place you reach.
It's a road you keep ridden, and sooner or later, somebody always rides ahead of the trail. This time, that somebody was a woman named Killia Voss, a descendant of Kayla 9, though she didn't boast it. She was born in orbit above a crimson desert moon called Nerith. Mainers hummed while they worked, and the sound echoed through the caverns like the breath of an old god. Killia didn't believe in old gods, nor the hum for that matter. She believed in equations, pressure, and proof. She said the hum was nothing more than residual cosmic resonance, the background radiation of the universe, interpreted by romantic minds' meaning. And yet, she couldn't shake the way her heartbeat always fell into rhythm with it when she worked. She was an engineer, one of the best, built the first gravity lattice that didn't collapse under its own ambition. She was practical, efficient, relentless, but deep down, there was a quiet restlessness in her. Every night, while others slept, she'd walk the outer catwalks of the station and stare down at Nerith red plains.
The wind there, in electric, ghost-like, carried a tone you could almost feel instead of hear. That tone pulled at her Rick memory. One evening, while inspecting a fault line in the lower mining struts, she felt it, a vibration through her boots, deep and rhythmic, like the planet itself was humming. She crouched down, placed her hand against the iron, and felt something alive. The miner said the hum came from the veins of ore beneath the surface, ancient metal singing to its own weight. But Killia knew better. This wasn't random. It was pattern. It was communication. She followed it, deeper and deeper into the tunnels, until she found herself facing a wall of black glass, smooth, unbroken, reflecting her lantern light like a mirror. The hum grew louder. Against her better judgment, she reached out. The surface rippled, as if made of water, and her hand sank through. When she pulled back, the hum stopped. Dead silence. That night, Killia couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw shapes moving inside that black reflection. Not people, not machines, but something else. A pulse, a wave, a understanding.
She began studying the samples she'd scraped off her glove, microscopic fragments of unknown material vibrating at frequencies that matched the hum bass resonance. It was as though the planet itself had recorded every note humanity made and was playing them back slow, all in time. Months passed. Her work grew obsessional. Her colleagues warned her she was losing herself, that she was starting to hear things, but Killia didn't care. She'd started building something she called the memory chamber, a device meant to amplify those buried tones and translate their waveforms into light. If the universe hums, she said, then it must remember the first test nearly tore the mining station apart. When she activated the chamber, the air itself thickened. Tools levitated. Every light in the colony flickered to the rhythm of a single beat, thump, 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 slow and ancient. Then came the images, fields of gold, rivers running blue, a man standing in dust with a notebook and a humble dream, Samuel Lane. The first hum. The miners panicked. They thought it was a haunting, but Killia stood in awe, tears running down her face as the vision rippled across her instruments.
The planet wasn't replaying the past, it was responding. Every hum since the beginning had left an imprint on reality itself, a kind of eternal resonance woven into the fabric of existence. And the black glass was not stone it at, it was memory made solid. When the event ended, she collapsed. The chamber had burned out, but the hum hadn't stopped. It was everywhere now, in the walls, the lights, the people. It didn't speak in words, but in presence. It was saying, I remember too. In the weeks that followed, Kalia discovery spread faster than she could have imagined. Scientists called it the echo field. Spiritualists called it the awakening. To the miners, it was simply the planet singing back. But to Kalia, it was proof. Proof that all sound, all life, all intention was cumulative. The universe wasn't a void, it was a choir, and humanity was just one voice in an infinite harmony. Her work inspired generations of resonance engineers, philosophers, and poets alike. They began listening to planets before drilling, singing to oceans before harvesting. Entire civilizations learned to harmonize their industries with natural frequencies, creating what became known as the lattice accord, a promise to never rebuild out of rhythm with existence. And when Kalia died, old and weary, they buried her not under stone, but under sound. Her grave was rocked by a hum so deep it could only be felt, not heard, a low, endless vibration echoing through the soil of Nereth. It was said that if you placed your ear to the ground, you'd hear not her, but every hum before her, woven together into one bounden melody. A song between stars, a balance between beginnings, a whisper that no matter how far humankind wandered, there would always be something calling it home. And if you listened long enough, real quiet, you could still hear her last words carried on the wind like embers from an eternal fire. The hum ain't a story. It's the heartbeat of remembrance centuries after Kalia passing. The lattice accord had become the quiet law of every known world.
Ships hummed softly before leaving port. Minds began their day with silence, and even the youngest children were taught to feel for rhythm before speaking. Civilization had learned to live in tune, not because it was easier, but because it was wiser. And yet, like every era before it, the great pendulum of human nature began its slow swing once more toward curiosity and defiance. After all, balance ain't a destination, it's a dance, and every generation forgets a few steps.
The next chapter began not with a prophet or engineer, but with a drifter named Hal Rowan. He was born on the edge of mapped space in a frontier cluster called the Reach, where trade routes thinned out and stars hung cold and uncharted. Folks out there didn't care much for the lattice accord. Too far from the core, too far from history. They built fast, mined hard, and hummed only when the generators failed. To them, the hum was superstition, a bedtime tale for people too scared of the dark. Hal was a wanderer, an old hand with calloused palms and dust on every boot he owned.
He'd spent half his life fixing ship engines and the other homeworlding in again. Nick's no family, no planet to call his own. A tin guitar and a knack for listening to things nobody else bothered to hear. He'd say things like engines talk if you let them, or the stars hum softer when they're lonely. The other spacers laughed, but they still followed him when their drives went quiet, 'cause somehow he always made them sing again. One night Hal drifted through a forgotten sector, just him, his ship, and the long hum of the reactor. He'd been following what he thought was static interference, a faint resonance loop he couldn't trace. But the more he listened, the more it sounded like something alive, a pattern in the noise, a song. Not mechanical, not random, familiar. He leaned back in his chair, thumbed the controls, and said under his breath, "Now what in the blue hell are you trying to say?" The signal grew stronger, clearer. It wasn't coming from any planet or relay, it was coming from the void itself.
Kind of sound that made your teeth ache and your heart slow down, deep and patient, like a god breathing through static. And when Hal tuned his instruments to match its wavelength, his whole ship shuddered, not in fear, but in recognition. The hull began to vibrate, low and steady, until it matched the tone exact. That when he saw it, a shimmer in the dark, like light bending around a shadow, a shape without edges, humming in the same key as his reactor. He drifted closer, whispering a tune from memory, one his grandmother used to hum back on a dust-covered moon. The shimmer pulsed in reply, changing pitch, harmonizing. Hal grinned. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered, "you're humming back." Over the next few days, Hal camped near that anomaly. He called it the mirror drift. Every time he hummed, it answered. Every time he spoke, it pulsed. It wasn't speaking language, but it wasn't mindless either. It felt like something listening from beyond the fabric of what folks thought real. And though he couldn't prove it, Hal started believing he'd found the edge of the hum itself, not the song X, but its source. He sent transmissions back to the core, but no one believed him. The Accord said the hum was everywhere, not anywhere, that it couldn't have a location. But Hal knew better. He stayed longer, listening, learning.
The mirror drift began to project images, faint at first, like reflections in water. A man with dust on his boots scribbling numbers in a worn notebook. A woman by a campfire humming through tears. A child listening to an ocean whisper, every generation before him flickering through light and memory. Then the images shifted, stars dying, worlds humming in perfect silence, a melody stretching beyond time itself. Hal realized the truth then. The hum wasn't born anywhere. It wasn't a sound trapped in space or history. It was the memory of creation remembering itself. The first vibration that split nothing into something. He laughed, that kind of tired laugh that come when awe and madness meet halfway. "You ain't a place," he whispered. "You're the start of everything." He tried to record it.
Tried to send back, but the data refused to stay still. Every attempt distorted, every waveform bent itself into a new rhythm, erasing the coordinates. The universe was protecting its secret. Same ain't always. Say, Hal did what only a wanderer could do. He stayed, he tuned his ship to the hum, shut off the engines, and let the drift take him. Folks say his ship never came back, but sometimes spacers swear they still hear a melody on long-range scans, a low, steady hum, followed by the faint strum of a guitar. They call it the rowing tone. And in every frontier bar, every outpost station where old miners drink and young pilots dream, they tell his story. Not like a myth, but like a song too important to forget. The man who found the hum horizon and chose to join it, some say he's still riding the edge of the void, following the pulse of eternity, humming to keep the stars company.
And maybe if you're out there one quiet night with your engines idling and your mind drifting, you might hear it too, that faint sound, far from everything known, singing back through the static. Make something of nothing, partner, and don't stop listening.
No one had found Hal Rowan's ship, but his melody spread wider than light itself. Pilots started reporting faint harmonics in their long-range comms, not interference, but a steady rhythm between channels. It came and went like breath, and folks began calling it the Lonesome Key. They said it only played for those drifting alone too long, a kind of compass for lost souls among the stars. The engineers laughed it off as magnetism, but spacers knew better.
They tapped the side of their hulls when they heard it, whispering small thanks under their breath, like bowing to an old friend riding their horizon. Years turned into centuries, and still the Lonesome Key lingered. It became part of the navigation systems of deep space ships, embedded in their calibrina, teaching even machines to hum just a little softer before jumping between worlds. A superstition, sure, but one that worked.
Engines synced smoother, fewer ships vanished, and across the star fields of mankind, silence no longer frightened anyone. It comforted M. The universe, it seemed, had finally learned to hum with its travelers, and yet there was one frontier left untraveled. A dark reach beyond all mapped coordinates, gravity itself began to fold back on its own memory. Astronomers called it the Hollow Verge, a region where its signals didn't reflect, light didn't et, and even the hum seemed to fade. The old story said it was wed creation curled back to listen to itself, but to most it was a graveyard, a place where sound went to die. That what a woman named Dr. Mara Quinn set her sights. She wasn't a spacer like Hal Rowan, nor a believer in legend. She was a historian of resonance, part physicist, part storyteller, obsessed with tracing the hum migration through human time. She'd spent 30 years studying every record from the Lane archives, the resonance engine, even fragments of Calais-Vos echo field experiments. But what haunted her most wasn't what she'd found. It was what she hadn't, the gaps, the silences between centuries. The hum had survived empires, disasters, evolution itself, and yet there were whole epochs where it had simply gone quiet. She wanted to know why. Her crew thought she was mad for heading to the Hollow Verge. You can't listen to what ain't there, they told her. That place eats sound. But Mara had spent her life learning that silence was not absence, it was invitation. So she packed her instruments, set her ship coordinates, and disappeared into the dark. For 6 months, there was nothing, no signal, no data, just the endless black folding in on itself. Then, one night, she caught it. Faint tape dust on glass, a vibration deep beneath her ship hull. It was not like the hum she'd studied. This one was slower, older, patient. The sensors couldn't register it, the readings all came back blank, but she felt it. Through her boots, through her bones, through the steady drum of her own heartbeat. She switched off the engines, powered down every system, and floated there, alone with the sound. The darkness outside wasn't empty anymore, it was alive. Waves of invisible rhythm rolled across her ship, pressing against the hull like tides. And then, deep inside the static, A voice not spoken, not heard, but understood. You've come far to listen. Why? Mara didn't answer out loud. She just closed her eyes and thought, because I want to know when it began. The silence stretched long enough to make her doubt her own mind. Then, like a memory rising from a dream, the voice returned, softer now, sadder somehow. There was never a beginning. The hum did not start. It was soaked. She trembled, whispering, by who? By whoever first chose to stay still long enough to hear it. That answer hit her harder than truth usually does. The hum wasn't an invention, nor a miracle. It was a discovery, the sound of awareness itself, echoing through time, every being that had paused, every life that had chose patience over chaos, had joined the same unbroken note. Humanity hadn't created the hum. They just remembered it. When Mara returned from the hollow verge, her ship logs were unreadable, blank, save for a sealed line recorded in her own handwriting. The hum is the proof that stillness leaves a mark. She never spoke publicly again. Instead, she traveled from world to world, teaching children not to chase the hum, but to make room for it. Her lessons were simple. Sit, breathe, wait. The rest would come. They say in her final years, she built a small cabin on one of the old earth ridges, the same valley that had once held Samuel Lane's first notebook. There, she'd sit on her porch through the rain, humming soft to herself. Locals thought that it was just an old woman lullaby, but every now and then the thunder outside would fall into rhythm with her tune, and the wind through the trees would start to harmonize. The world itself remembered her name, and on the night she passed, no one heard thunder. No wind, no rain, only one long, low hum rolling across the hills, echoing through stone and soil and the old bones of the earth, the same song that had carried every name before hers. It was the sound of remembrance, the proof that silence and sound were never enemies, only partners. A conversation that never truly ends. And if you find yourself sitting still one night, maybe by a campfire, maybe by a window streaked with rain, and you hear that low tone, humming steady and sure, don't be afraid. Just listen, because that's not the end of the story. That the sound of every story still being told. Make something of nothing, remember why. Long after Dr. Mara Quintine, her writings were passed down to worn journals, voice recordings, and fragments of code tucked into libraries no one visited anymore. The worlds of men had quieted. Cities no longer roared like furnaces. Skies were clear again, not from collapse, but from learning. The new age was one of patience. Trade ships waited for the tides of gravity before jumping. Crops grew with the rhythm of weather instead of fighting it. And whole economies were built not on extraction, but on resonance. Every hum was recorded, every silence kept sacred. They called it the age of Stillwater. Stillwater wasn't about doing nothing. It was about letting things be long enough to hear in mind. And in that stillness, wealth took on a different meaning. It wasn't the coins in your pocket nor the titles before your name. It was what you could leave steady enough for others to build upon. The new financians weren't called bankers, they were stewards of flow. They lent not money but rhythm, help a community find its pace, its hum, its balance. Investments weren't measured by profit alone, but by harmony, how well a venture fit into the grander rhythm of things. There was one steward who came to define that ed, an old ranch hand turned economist named Enoch Vale. Born out on the frontier plains of a terraformed world called Harrow Rest, Enoch grew up where the nights were long and the stars hummed close enough to touch. His family didn't have much, a few cattle, a small windmill farm, and a lot of debt inherited from men who'd chased too much too fast. He learned early what imbalance sounded at the creak of a windmill spinning out of sync, the buzz of markets hungry for more than they could stomach. It was one steward who came to define that ed, an old ranch hand turned economist named Enoch Vale. Born out on the frontier plains of a terraformed world called Harrow Rest, Enoch grew up where the nights were long and the stars hummed close enough to touch. His family didn't have much, a few cattle, a small windmill farm, and a lot of debt inherited from men who'd chased too much too fast. He learned early what imbalance sounded at the creak of a windmill spinning out of sync, the buzz of markets hungry for more than they could stomach. When he was a boy, his granddad would sit him down by the campfire and tell him stories about a sound older than mankind, the hum that tied everything together. He'd say, Enoch, the trick ain't in hearing it, the trick in remembering it when everything else gets loud. Back then, Enoch didn't pay much mind to such things. He wanted a faster life, the core worlds, the bright cities, the noise. So when he came of age, he left the ranch behind and joined the exchange guild, working in the trade hubs where currency flowed like rivers and fortunes turned overnight. He became good at it, too good maybe. Within a decade, he'd built an empire of trade routes and settlement bonds. But success brought with it a kind of hollowness, like the silence between thunderclaps. No matter how much he gained, there was always the same echo in his chest, it offbeat, a dissonance. He'd lie awake at night in high towers, hearing the hum of machinery below, and realize it didn't match the hum inside him. It was all out of tune. The world was rich, but restless. That when the fall came quiet and slow at first, like the still air before a storm, markets twisted under their own weight, worlds overproduced what no one needed, and the exchange collapsed. Enoch lost near everything. He found himself back where he started, dirt under his boots, sky stretched wide above, and silence thick the ash. But there, in that stillness, he started humming. Not out of habit, out of memory, and damned if the windmill beside his cabin didn't start spinning steady again, falling right into his rhythm, that when it hit him his granddad had been right. The hum wasn't just a sound, it was a compass. It always pointed home. So Enoch did something no banker had before. He walked away from numbers and started building with patience. He led the folks who'd been ruined like him, farmers, traders, even old miners, and taught them to listen first, laugh second. You can't plant in noise, he said. The ground won't hear you right. They rebuilt Harrow Rest not through credit or speculation, but through rhythm. Each community found its pulse, its hum, its sustainable pace. They planted slow, shared fast, and never let the river of trade flow faster than the land could replenish. Within 20 years, Harrow Rest became a beacon of balance. Its economy grew steady and dawned, no booms, no busts, yet the patient wealth of generations. Scholars from the core came to study it, calling it the veil principle, the idea that money, a sound, must have rest between the notes to stay beautiful. The Accord recognized it the foundational law across the colonies. But when Enoch was asked to lead the planetary exchange, he refused. I ain't looking to lead, he said. I'm just listening to keep the world from rushing itself blind in. In his final years, Enoch built a small schoolhouse where he taught what he called financial stillness. He didn't lecture with charts or graphs, he told stories. Stories of men like Samuel Lane and Calais Valls, of Hal Rowan drifting through the void, and Dr. Mara listening to silence itself. He'd sit by the window, rain pattering soft on the roof, voice low and steady as the hum of old wood. Every fortune, he'd say, starts with stillness. Every ruin starts with hurry. If you can't wait long enough to hear the hum, you ain't building your gambling. When Enoch passed, the folk of Harrow Rest didn't build him a monument. They built a fountain instead, water flowing slow, deep, and constant, shaped to sound at a hum when the wind passed over it. Travelers would stop to rest beside it, close their eyes, and swear they could hear the sound of every voice that had listened before them. The sound of patience, of memory, of the quiet kind of success that doesn't glitter, it glows. And so the story turned again, as stories always do, from noise to silence, from hurry to rhythm, from want to enough. And in every frontier campfire, every rainy night cabin, every quiet corner of the cosmos, the say-low hum kept drifting on, the voice of those who had learned, the song of those who had remembered. By the time the age of Stillwater had reached its 3rd century, the hum of prosperity stretched far and wide. Trade flowed like rivers across the stars, but not in the frantic rush of old markets. Every world had learned to breathe, to grow slow. To build wealth like a campfire tended steady, never let it flare too fast, nor die too soon. Yet every peace mankind then knew, it came a restlessness in the hearts of a few who'd never been content. Gentle listeners, they didn't mean harm. They were explorers, dreamers, folks who loved the unknown too much to sit still. And out among those wanderers was a man named Harlan Creed. Now Harlan was a prospector of a different breed, not for gold, not for oil, not even for data. He hunted for silence, the pure kind, the kind that didn't ebb back at ebb. He said there were still places in the universe where the hum didn't reach, places that refused to sing, and he aimed to find one. Folks thought he was foolish, and no such thing, then nothing they'd say, laughing. Even nothing hums if you wait long enough. But Harlan had that itch, the same one that drove men to climb mountains and cross deserts, the kind of itch only mystery can scratch. He'd been born under the shadow of the veil principle, taught from boyhood that wealth was rhythm, not speed. His father was a steward, his mother a teacher of resonance, but Harai, He was too wide for classrooms, too curious for comfort. He'd stare at the stars and wonder if somewhere beyond all the sound there was quiet enough to start again. He didn't want to destroy the hum. He wanted to find what it was humming about. So one year, after selling his last patch of land and saying his goodbyes, Har-Rod loaded up an old survey vessel named the Lark Memory and set course for the outer Verd, the last cartographic frontier before the known void. He packed late a few ration crates, a recorder, and his granddad old harmonica. For when the silence gets too heavy, he said. Then he drifted off the maps, humming low to himself. The stars began to thin. Weeks turned into months. Then the sensors started going quiet. Radiation, static, all the little background noises of the cosmos, they just stopped. It wasn't like they'd died, it was that they'd never been there. Har-Rod sat in his chair, brow furrowed, staring at the black outside his viewport. No light, no echo. Just stillness so deep it made his pulse sound loud. Well, he muttered, "Guess I found it."
Hold up the water that long.
They fall again, according to entering what I reckon is the true no man.
Feels wrong to call it empty, though. It like the world holding its breath. Ain't hostile to you. As the days passed, his equipment began losing calibration. Clocks drifted out of sync, engines pulsed irregular, and even his voice recorder started playing back slower than he'd spoken. Time itself felt like it was stretching thin, pulled like taffy between now and forever. He kept humming to keep himself grounded, playing that harmonica soft through the long hours. But one night the note came back, echoed. Not loud, not sharp, just one faint reply from the dark. He froze, breath caught halfway. Then he smiled. "Knew you were out there," he whispered. He tuned his instruments again and sent out a simple tone, a low C, pure and steady. The dark answered back a half step higher, then another tone, then another. Soon the two were calling and answering each other like an old duet, but there was no pattern, no logic he could find.
It wasn't math, it wasn't music, it was choice. Every note seemed to listen before replying, as if whatever was out there wasn't a voidette, but something alive. Not alive like people or animals or machines, but aware, patient, curious. He hated the listener. Har-Rod stayed with it for months. He played melodies, it answered. He whistled, it replied in harmony. And the longer he stayed, the more he began to feel something deep in his bones, a weight, gentle but vast, like being seen from every direction at once. He asked it questions, though it never spoke in words, but sometimes when he played slow, he'd see shapes ferment in the glass of his viewport, ripples like water bending on invisible fingers. Each time he played, those shapes got clearer. A spiral, a wave, a kind of cosmic breath. Then came the last entry, day 31. His voice said, crackling, faint on the old recovered log, like I understand now. The listener ain't out there. It in everything, even this ship, this air, this silence. The hum wasn't the universe singing, it was the universe remembering how to listen. Maybe that all we were too. Listeners who forgot we were part of the song. After that, the Lark Memory was never found. Just fragments, bits of hull floating like dust near the verge. But those who analyzed the wreck said something strange. The metal itself had taken on a frequency faint but measurable. It hummed when struck. Not noise, not random. A note in perfect C. Engineers tried to replicate it but failed every time. The alloy had changed somehow, as if the silence had rewritten it. Years later, when travelers passed the verge, Ed reported hearing music without sorts. The harmonica soft and distant, drifting across the void. Some say it Har-Ron Creed still out there playing to the listener. Others say it the universe playing back to him. Either way, folks learned a truth from his tale. The hum wasn't just something to chase or preserve, it was something to join. Every act of patience, every honest moment of quiet was part of that infinite song. And every now and then, late at night, when the wind moved through old glass or rain taps against metal just right, it plays in tune with Har-Ron harmonica, a duet between the living and the listening. The sound of faith, not in gods, not in systems, but in the patient rhythm of the universe itself. They said the listener faded after that once Har-Ron Creed harmonica stopped echoing across the dark. The sound of it drifted into myth. But stories have a way of staying awake even when the tellers go quiet. And so, generations later, out in a mining colony carved into the bones of an asteroid belt, an old man named Elias Thorne started hearing that same note in his dreams. Elias wasn't a dreamer like Har-Rod or a thinker like Enoch Vale. He was a worker, one of those men who built his life swinging hammers and breathing dust. spent 40 years chasing ore veins through the cold tunnels of Orion 7, saving little, losing plenty, raising a son who'd left for the inner systems before his beard turned gay. He wasn't poor, but he wasn't rich neither. Just steady. The kind of man who outlasted storms by not trying to outfight him the company he worked for. Some big core outfit paid him in chits that barely covered the cost of living. But Elias had a trick. See, while the other miners gambled away their fish or burned through them on short-lived joys, he kept something sacred, a ledger. Not digital, handwritten. Every payday, he'd mark down what he earned, what he spent, and what he saved. Even if it was just a sealed coin, it went in the hold column. He'd say, "Ain't much, but it hums." No one knew what he meant by that. Then came the silence. A collapse deep in the mines cut off a dozen workers. Elias was one of them. No signal, no rescue ships, no word. For 3 days, the world thought they were gone. Down there, buried under rock and dark, Elias found himself humming low, not out of fear, but out of habit. It was a tune his daddy used to sing, a slow rhythm, more feeling than sound. The others joined in after a while, voices rough and tired, humming to keep their hearts steady, and damned if the walls didn't start vibrating in answer. Not enough to rake loose, but enough to make the air feel alive. It gave him courage, kept him sane till the rescue team broke through on the 4th day. After that, Elias became something of a legend. Folks said he'd tear the rock itself to let him out. He'd laugh it off, saying was the hum, just had to remember it, and when the company offered him early retirement, he took it, moved into a quiet shack by the outer cliffs of the colony, and started teaching the young miners who'd come by after shift. But he didn't teach them drills or tradecraft. He taught them patience, money lick, or he'd say, "You don't dig faster to get more. You dig truer. You pace your swing, listen for the tone, feel the give in the earth. You'll know when it's ready." He showed him his ledger page after page, lines of numbers written neat and steady, every coin accounted for. But in the margins, he'd written words, little thoughts, spent 1 chit on a neighbor tools, good trade, saved 10 from luck at cards, don't tempt it again, rain out the dome today, mine's ends to wait. It was not a ledger anymore, it was a life written in balance. Wealth wasn't what he had, it was what he understood. Then one night he was sitting by the window tier, and out at the mining fields he heard it again, that same low tone from his youth, deep being the heart of stone. The sound made his glass rattle, soft and slow. He leaned forward, whispering, "Well, I'll be damned. You still out there, aren't you?" He stepped outside, wind whipping dust across his boots, and stood on the cliff edge. Out in the distance, the mining lights blinked at tired stars. The hum rolled again, stronger now, coming from beneath the ground. He didn't flinch. He just smiled, tipped his hat, and said, "You hook your time." Then he whistled low, a 3-note melody that drifted off into the dark. The hum answered, one perfect C. The next morning, the miners found his shack empty. No sign of struggle, no trace of travel, just his ledger sitting open on the table, a single line written in his hand. The sound patient, and so am I. Beside it lay his harmonica, rusted but clean, humming faint when the wind touched it. Some say he followed the hum into the stone, same way Harrod followed it into the stars. Others say he's walked until he couldn't tell the difference between silence and peace. Whatever the truth, his ledger became holy writ for miners, traders, and wanderers alike. They called it the Book of Steady Hands. It taught generations how to build a fortune the way you build trust, with rhythm, not rush. And every time a young miner struck his first vein or a settler made his first honest profit, they'd hum 3 notes under their breath, just like Elias used to. A thank you, a promise, a remembrance. For even in the heart of iron, even in the coldest dark, there was music if you stayed still long enough to hear it. And so the hum lived on, not in machines, not in markets, not even in the stars, but in people. Ordinary folk keeping their pace, patient and true, the wealth of the quiet kind, built not for applause but for endurance, the kind that outlasts wars, empires, even time itself. Because the hum was never about making more, it was about making enough. Enough to live, enough to share, enough to rest. They say if you visit that old asteroid now, and you stand by the cliffs where Elias Thorne used to live, you can still hear it. Not through the air, not through your ears, but through the soles of your boots. The ground hums, faint and steady, as if the world itself remembers every hand that once shaped it. A reminder that even in the dust, wealth can hum, and in the hum, life keeps singing.
After Elias Thorne vanished into the quiet, the world kept on turning. But something subtle began to change in the way folks measured their work. His ledger copy, rewritten, adapted, spread farther than any empire could. It reached the core academies, the outworld farms, even the trade fleets that circled the fringe. Wherever people worked, wherever they traded, that same phrase began to appear carved into walls, printed on bonds, etched into the edges of coins. The sound patient, and so am I. It wasn't a slogan, it was a discipline. The Book of Steady Hands became a code for life. Each generation found new meaning in its pages. For miners, it was the rhythm of the pickaxe and the rest between swings. For traders, it was the pause before a bargain, the silence that told them whether they were dealing in greed or fairness. For families, it was the art of saving without fearing, spending without rushing, living without losing your tune. Out on the planet Meridian, a lush frontier world half covered in forests and storms, a new kind of guild rose up around those ideas. They called themselves the Keepers of the Hum.
They weren't a religion, though, and treated them with profits. They were farmers, builders, engineers, and teachers who believed wealth wasn't something you took from the world. It was something you tuned yourself to. They built their homes from stone and windwood, each structure designed to catch the breeze just right so it hung through the night. Walking through a keeper settlement felt like wandering through a songlow, steady, endless. They studied the ledgers of old, Lane notebooks, Vale laws, Quinn journals, Thorn ledger, and they didn't worship M, they listened to M. Each raker told a piece of a long conversation between humanity and patience itself. And over time, they began to see what the others hadn't guessed. The hum wasn't bound to sound or stone or stars. It was the O of choice, the proof that will and time could meet and build something beautiful between them. But always, their piece, there's someone willing to sell it. The outer empires, rebuilt and hungry again, saw the keepers balance of stagnation. They started buying up frontier worlds, pushing automation, everyone's credit, teaching the same old speed that buried mankind before.
Meridian resisted at first, keeping its pace, its rhythm, its calm, but you can't outshout an empire that measures profit in lightning. Soon, the young started drifting away, chasing fast money, easy shine. The hum of the villages grew faint. That when a young woman named Rhea Vale, great-granddaughter of Enoch himself, took up the task of protecting what her people called the slow gold. She wasn't a preacher nor a fighter. She was a weaver, working the old handlooms that sang when the shuttle hit the thread. Every tapestry she made carried a sound, notes woven into fiber, patterns that whispered when wind passed through. She believed if the people forgot how to listen, she could make them feel the memory instead. She began crafting great banners, bright, long things that hung from towers, bridges, even the sails of merchant ships. They hummed when storms passed, when dawn rose, when folks loved to trade. It started at art, but soon those banners became symbols. Merchants who flew one did business fair and slow. Farmers who hung one by their barns always found their harvest steady. The banners didn't bring luck, they brought rhythm. Rhea called them wind ledgers.
Then came the day the empires moved in earnest. They brought fleets and contracts and false promises, offer the keepers of the hum buyouts and loans they couldn't repay. When the first storm of debt came rolling across the colonies, it hit like a gale tearing through patience, ripping apart the quiet. Rhea stood watch on the ridge above the capital, the banners she'd woven whipped and snapped in the wind. She didn't weep, she just listened. There beneath the storm roar, she heard something faint, the hum still there, still steady. They can't buy the sound, she whispered. It ain't for sale. So she did what her ancestors had done before her. She waited. When the empire economy burned itself hollow, markets crashing, ships idle, machines humming to no one, Rhea people were still standing. The wind ledgers had guided them through, their rhythm keeping balance when numbers failed, and when the dust settled, the traders who'd once mocked them came back begging to learn their ways. Rhea didn't gloat.
She's just taught. Every storm runs out of thunder, she told them, and when it does, the hum's still there, waiting for you to remember the tune. By the end of her life, Meridian sky was full of banners in, each humming a different pitch, but a part of the same slow song. Wealth returned, not in stacks or vaults, but in the measured grace of people who finally understood what it meant to earn without taking. They built an archive in her name, filled not with currency, but with sound. You could walk through its halls and hear the voices of generations, their words, their silences, their steady hands at work, and they say when the wind blows just right across Meridian valleys. You can hear Rhea Loon still singing in the distance. Not mournful, not proud, just certain. The kind of song that doesn't need to prove itself anymore. The hum of endurance, of creation without destruction, of patience richer than any coin.